nije, oni su tamo kao. Ja bi da ne gubimo vrijeme da... Evo, sjedi, ima još u prvom redu mjesta. Ima izvolite. Izvolite, nikoga ne čuo. Ja sam prije nego što bilo što kažemo, ja bih molila da minutom šutnje odamo počast ubijenoj socijalnoj radnici našoj kolegici Blaženki Poglašnoj. Organizatori ovog događanja su uz naše goste iz engleske Family Separation Clinic, Nicka i Karen Woodall, Udruga sudaca za mladež, dalje ne znam nikad izgovoriti ostatak naziva, nema veze, i i Poliklinika za zaštitu djece mladih Grada Zagreba. Najprije bih prepustila riječ Lavni da kaže ona par rečenica.
Hvala lijepo. Drago mi je što smo se okupili ovako i što nismo iz jednog sektora. Vidim liječnike, vidim učitelje, vidim svoje suce, vidim advokate, što me jako raduje. Jedino ne vidim državne odvjetnike, to me žalosti kao i obično. Ja bih voljela da u ovom dijelu doista multidisciplinarno krenemo sa psiholozima, sa socijalnim radnicima, sa socijalnim pedagozima, sa pedagozima, sa učiteljima, sa nastavnicima, sa liječnicima, sa pravnicima, da možemo zauzeti neki stav kako pomažemo djeci. Kao dugogodišnji sudac, ne samo sudac u kaznenoj grani, nego kao i predsjednica udruge sudaca za mladež i obiteljskih sudaca, što je vrlo važno napomenuti kada se govori o nasilju, koji govore o tome i koji mogu donositi odluke vezano za s kim će dijete živjeti i kakvi će biti kontakt s djetetom, što je vrlo bitno za današnji cijelu prezentaciju koju će imati Karen i Nicka Woodall. Mi smo izuzetno zahvalni i Karen i Nicka Woodall koji će nam održati besplatno predavanje za sve naše stručnjake. Ja uvijek kažem da ponovno učim i svaki put nešto novo naučim od njih, jer u tom dijelu kao sudac moram znati u trenutku što i kako kad imam određeni prijedlog stručne osobe. Ovdje kod nas u Hrvatskoj to može biti Centar za socijalnu skrb ili stručnjaka Poliklinike za zaštitu djece Grada Zagreba, što je u korist djeteta, da ne razmišljam kao sudac da bih još trebala dati vrijeme jednom ili drugom roditelju, nego da djelujem u trenutku kada je to potrebno djetetu. Ona stalna žurnost koju govorimo u našim kaznenim i obiteljskim postupcima je nešto što je jako važno za dijete. Danas djetetu donijeti nešto što će biti bolje je ono što ga možemo osposobiti da bude normalan građanin u budućnosti. Ako propustimo to vrijeme, onda smo propustili mogućnost da mu pružimo i tretman i da mu pružimo nekakvu bolju budućnost. Zato se jako zalažem da ovdje budu i pravnici koji trebaju znati o tome kako donositi odluke, što pitati stručnjaka kada nam dolazi na sud i kako u tom dijelu biti sigurni da je naš zaključak, odnosno naša odluka, ja bih rekla i privremena mjera prije nego donesemo odluku, je bolja nego nikakva odluka. Zato se još jednom zahvaljujem Gradani, naravno, koja je pokretač ovdje u Hrvatskoj i Poliklinici za zaštitu djece Grada Zagreba, koja nam je i dovela Karen i Nicka Woodalla, koji su nam omogućili u ovom dijelu da govorimo o otuđenju djece i kako ponovno djetetu vratiti oba roditelja. Hvala vam lijepo.
Naša najbliža suradna ustanova nama u zdravstvu je socijalni rad. Ja bih molila da nam rečenicu dvije kaže i načelnica u Ministarstvu socijalne skrbi, Tatjana Kartić-Sanić.
Dobro jutro svima. Pozdrav i zahvala Poliklinici i sudaca za mladež, koje našim stručnjacima koji će progovoriti o ovoj hvale vrijednoj temi. Kao što je Gordana rekla, specifično sustava socijalne skrbi je što u postupcima odluka o sadržajima roditeljske skrbi i u situacijama manipulativnog i konfliktnog roditeljstva sustav socijalne skrbi djeluje u svim fazama postupanja, od procjene, od upućivanja prijedloga do sudu, pa do mjera obiteljsko-pravne zaštite i određenih savjetovanja i tretmana. Medijski linč koji se događa zadnja 3 mjeseca u velikoj mjeri je bio uvjetovan upravo situacijama razvojnog i konfliktnog roditeljstva, kada su upravo zbog napora sustava socijalne skrbi da educira svoje stručnjake u ovom području, da standardizira postupanja. Vjerujem da znate da smo mi krenuli sa primjenom upitnika za procjenu dobrobiti djece u situacijama konfliktnog i razvojnog roditeljstva, na koje bi se naslanjali iza toga nalazi stručnjaka Poliklinike i drugih stručnjaka koji se bavimo ovim područjem, upravo kako bismo zaustavili sindrom otuđenja roditelja, kako bismo spriječili situacije kao što smo nedavno imali u jednom zagrebačkom centru za jednog našeg korisnika koji nema kontakt već nekoliko godina sa svojim djetetom, koji je kroz različite sudske postupke institucije traži stručnu pomoć. Postupak je završio nakon cijelog niza godina na način da su mu zabranjeni kontakti, da je sudac procijenio da to što dijete odbija bilo kakav kontakt s njim je osnova za donošenje odluke da dijete dalje nema kontakt s njim i da ostane živjeti s majkom koja ga u stvari otuđila od tog drugog roditelja. To je samo jedna od niza situacija s kojima se centri za socijalnu skrb svakodnevno susreću, s kojima se Poliklinika susreće. Naša suradnja je uspješna, ja se nadam da će dalje biti takva i ovo je samo početak, ja vjerujem, suradnju u kojoj ćemo mi zaista stručnjake svog sustava nastaviti pojačati, da prepoznaju situacije, da pravovremeno reagiraju, ali ja ću iskoristiti priliku, obzirom da smo čuli da ima i drugih sustava, da nam je zaista pritom potrebna suradnja zdravstva, odgojno-obrazovnih ustanova, škola, sudaca, odvjetništva u prepoznavanju. Kad pokrenemo postupak zbog zlostavljanja djeteta, emocionalnog nasilja nad djetetom i otuđenja, da ne dobijemo odbijenicu od državnog odvjetništva zato što smatraju da nisu ispunjeni uvjeti, a dijete nema 2, 3, 4, 5 godina kontakt. Svaki dan za to dijete je bespovratno izgubljeno. Hvala lijepa.
Evo, ja neću puno pričati, umjesto da ja pričam, da govorim ono što ćemo, neke stvari od toga što bi ja željela reći, ćemo čuti od naših gostiju. Prikazat ćemo vam jedan kratki snimak razgovora sa otuđenom majkom kao uvod u teoriju koju će nam prezentirati Karen i Nicka Woodall.
Moći način omogućuje da dijete ima i jednog i drugog roditelja.
Dakle, to je jedna situacija koja jasno da nije bilo primjerno od djete, koje je jedan incident s udarom i tjelesnim kažnjavanjem, nešto se dobro protumačio kao zlostavljanje.
Da, pa ne bih rekao da je to protumačio, nego je zapravo htio se osvetiti jer većina roditelja iz vijesta ili nečega te ne može dodariti svoje dijete, ali to ne znači da će ostalo automatski drugi roditelj projaviti kazneno i uzeti vam dijete i otužiti za neke stvari koje nisu istina, pogotovo što on 3 godine ne dozvoljava apsolutno nijak kontakt. Ja trenutno dijete viđam samo po susretima pod nadzorom, mimo toga otac ne dozvoljava ni telefonske pozive, ni da ga recimo moji otac i majka ne vidi ili bilo koji drugi od moje strane žitelje, odnosno čak i zajednički prijatelji koje je moje dijete poznavalo dok smo živjeli zajedno.
Vi ste došli s jednom kažem
Da.
centrima, sudu, vještačenja.
Znači, moj iskustvo se sustavilo da je sustav zapravo užasno neučinkovit. Svi priče o dobrobiti djeteta, a zapravo sve ono što rade je ne na korist djeteta, nego na njegovu štetu. Konkretno godine školske, do 9. mjeseca ja djete nisam niti vidjela, ni čula jer me otac isključio mobitel. On je omogućio da na bilo koji način imamo kontakt, što je u tom periodu dovelo zapravo do potpunog otuđenja. Kako je na sudu centar preporučio da dijete živi sa ocem, naravno da je to eskaliralo i da je zapravo došlo i do svih onih negativnih posljedica koje su vezane uz otuđenje, da je dijete se jednostavno stopilo sa ocem i da on niti tada, a naravno nakon što je prošao ovako velik vremenski period, nema više nikakav kontakt ne slučaj za mene i ono je zapravo se priklonilo ocu ne zato što ne želi imati ništa s majkom, nego jednostavno je prisiljeno bilo zabrati stranu i on u svom svijetu ne vidi za njega, to izgleda on je sa ocem koji ga hranio i volače brine o njemu i to je osjeti i on to pokazuje na način da mi na susretima da zapravo on uopće se nama razgovara. Znači, mi zadnje 3 mjeseca se uopće ne viđamo, ali smo se prije toga viđali 2 puta tjedno. On u zadnje 2 godine ni jedan me nije pogledao, ni jedan me nije progovorio, čak niti Bog kako si, na svako moje pitanje me ignorira. Kad recimo socijalna radnica postavi to isto pitanje, onda on odgovori sa da, ne ili isto tako čak niti njoj uopće ne odgovori.
Kako se sad imaš promjena vaše rekla za tebe? Kada se primetili neke znakove da nije dobro?
Ono što je na njemu već. On je mršav, djet, ono što znam je odlazim u školu i razgovaram sa roditeljima drugim iz razreda, niti kod niti jednog svojih prijatelja, nitko od prijatelja njegovih ne smije doći kod njega na igranje. Znači, djete zapravo potpuno izolirano i živi isključivo u svom svijetu. Isto tako na njegovom ponašanju se vidi da on ima sad 15 godina, a on se ponaša da ima 3-4 godine manje, potpuno je povučen, sramežljiv. Jednom prilikom smo susreli jednu zajedničku poznanicu, odnosno moju prijateljicu u gradu koja ga pozna, koja ga je srdečno pozdravila. On se izmaknuo i ponašao da nikada nije vidio. Što se neki pokazuje, meni kao lajku govori da djete nije dobro. Odnosno, najbolji pokazuje to što ako djete svoju majku ne može pogledati, ako ne može s njom razgovarati, sigurno nije dobro.
Hvala, prije smo rekli da imate puno energije. Sam radom po zastavljanju susrete, javljate, odlazite na susrete i lovite se pošto se sustavom konstantno. Što mi daje snage?
To znam da ako ja ne povem djeci, neću nikog pomoći. On sam ne može pomoći, sustav, nažalost, je identificirao da se radi o otuđenju. Znači imamo od vještaka još iz 2017. nalaz da je dijete otuđeno i da ga je roditelj koji ga otuđio njegov otac. Ali, nažalost, zbog pogrešnog daljnjeg tumačenja, dijete i dalje živi sa ocem. Vještaci su u svom nalazu rekli da ukoliko unutar 6 mjeseci ne dođe do pomaka da sud automatizmom bi trebao dijete vratiti meni da možemo krenuti odgovarajuću terapiju. Nažalost, od toga je prošla godina i pol. Mi smo sad nedavno ponovno bili kod tog istog vještaka koji je rekao da ja nisam imala zapravo priliku uspostaviti kontakt i da je preporuka da ja svaki dan vodim dijete u školu, da ga vodim kod njegovog psihijatra, da se družimo od vremena kafića i da imamo nekakve zajedničke aktivnosti, ali vještaci još nisu vidjeli da u izvještajima nagrada piše da otac ne dozvoljava susrete van oni koji su propisani sudskom odlukom, odnosno da ti susreti traju 10-15 minuta i da dijete nakon toga odlazi. Znači, ono što...
Osjećate i pritisak i odgovornost da se vi morate pobrinuti za dijete, da sustavu ne nalazite saveznike koje
sustav zapravo, ono što je moje mišljenje, sustav zapravo ne su napraviti. I da oni prepuštaju stvari, ako se dogodi dobro, ako ne, zapravo da ih nije svejedno. A meni, kao majci, kao roditelju nije svejedno, jer vidim da moje dijete nije dobro. Svjesna sam što za njegov danjih i psihološki emocionalno razlika znači ako će živjeti u takvoj izolaciji, jer on je preskočio jednu razrednu fazu. On je u razdoblju između 5. i 8. razreda kad se trebamo početi izlaziti, imati nekakve simpatije, naučiti neke socijalne vještine, on je taj dio nažalost preskočio. Kreće na jedinstvenu srednju školu, što će mu biti ogroman šok. Vrlo teško će se snaći, a neke vještine koje je u ranije dobi treba razviti nema razvijene I to može zapravo ići ako će imati sreće u dobrom smjeru, a ako neće, može stvarno jako loše završiti.
Pričamo o djetetu, i zaista imate dalje fokus na djetetu, ali ono što rijetko pitamo je da je pomoćno dobro da čuvamo priliku kako se osim s otuđenjem roditelja.
Djece užasno. Već se godinu je pola njega izbrisano i dosta ja sam dala prvi 3 mjeseca u depresiji, dok nisam zapravo počela čitati, puno mi je tu pomogla i Poliklinika, gdje sam tu zapravo došla do pravih informacija, isto tako Karen blog koji sam počela redno pratiti, pročitala sam jako puno literature, da razumijem zapravo što se to događa. Jer su dječke odbačeno, dječke se da ste nešto pogriješili, a zapravo nije problem vama. Nije problem niti djetetu. Djeti se ne može pomoći, a vi ste stavljeni u doslovno nekakvi kontekst situacije gdje se vas optužilo i očekuju se od vas da napravite čudo. Znači, najbolje to mogu opisati kod ovog zavežu ruke i noge i stavili su bazen da se turate sa olimpijskim pobjednikom na 100 metara. Nemate šanse. A morate znaći snage i morate znaći načina kako zapravo i njega pobijedite na kraju. Zbog djeteta ali zbog sebe, jer ja, znači, bilo koji roditelj koji je ostalo djeteta ne može pustiti svoje dijete, ali isto tako da bi mi bili cjeloviti, potpuni, da nemate svoju zadovoljstvenu način u životu, morate imati kontakt svoje djetetu. Inače ne bi imali.
Što je vam za kraj reći, što ste poručili ljudima u sustavu, dakle svima koji dolaze u kontakt sa obiteljima u kojima se nađe kao problem otuđenja?
Znači,
što je važno?
Ovo što je važno, koliko god na prvi pogled slučaj izgleda komplicirano, kompleksno, roditelji su u sukobu, treba pogledati istu površinu, zagrijati se malo dublje i vrlo brzo će pokazati koja je tu prava istina. Samo treba pogledati dijete. Ako je dijete živi s roditeljem i ako nije dobro, ako je to dijete ne može imati odnos s drugim roditeljem, to ne može pokazati da nešto tu nije kako treba. A procedura zapravo je vrlo jednostavna, međunarodno već prihvaćena i prvi korak je sigurno odvojiti dijete od roditelja koji ga otuđuje, vrati ga, ako je moguće odmah roditelju od kojeg je tuđen i kroz pravilnu terapiju sa jednim drugim roditeljom, ako žele, i naravno djetetom, pomoć djetetu da on zapravo postane ponovno ono što je. Jer ono što ja vidim na mom sinu, on nema svoje misli, on nema svoje osjećaje. On je jednostavno sklopljen, nažalost, sa ocem i otac svoje nekakve traume koje nosi zapravo projecira kroz njega i sveti se na krivi način. Što je nažalost zapravo djetetu jako teško jer dijete hoće pomoć svom roditelju i na neki način je shvatila zapravo taj roditelj s kojim on trenutno živi je taj koji treba više pomoć od ovog drugog roditelja koji se je na neki način prilagodio i učio nositi sa situacijom, pa sad neki se bore. Nažalost, ono što sam ja pričala jako puno s prvim roditeljima, jako puno njih nakon nekog vremena odustane jer se moraju borbe sa sustavom.
Niste ustali.
Ne, neću sigurno ostati i bit će jednog dana jako dobra knjiga i jako dobar film. U cijelom ovom slučaju.
Za vaš pomoć želim puno sreće, a nadam se da je ovo snimka i sve što radite, da je nikakav osjećaj smisla ovog iskustva i da će zaista pomoći nekim ljudima koji gledaju da bolje, kompetentnije, adekvatnije, da se postao i da stvarno štitimo tu djecu koja to pričamo.
Ja sam to radim i želim samo da roditeljima koji su u sličnoj situaciji poručiti da nikad ne odustaju od dijete i treba.
Ok, evo čuli smo iz prve ruke iskustvo. Mislim da mi više ne trebamo dalje ništa pričati i molimo Karen i Nicka da oni održe svoju prezentaciju, predavanje. Nakon toga će biti otvoren prostor za diskusiju i za pitanja. Radimo do 12 sati. Karen, Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gordana. I think the way to open this is to say dobre utro.
Yes.
Am I right? Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much to Gordana and to Judge Lana and to the head of the Social Welfare Centre, who I'm sorry I don't know your name, to see these three people together talking about the way partnerships work in resolving difficult cases of parental alienation is truly inspirational. It tells us that in Croatia, the right ingredients for addressing this problem are already in place. And it's been a real honour and a privilege to work with Gordana and her team over the past 3 years particularly, and to see how the knowledge that we have shared with them has been taken and translated into services which are already being developed and delivered to address the problem. My name is Karen Woodall, this is Nick Woodall, we are colleagues, we are also married, and we've worked in this field for over 10 years now, particularly working to reunite very severely alienated children with the parents that they have rejected. Those of you who read my blog will have followed the journey that we have had in understanding the issue of parental alienation and coming to a place where we recognise that what's happening to children in the post-separation landscape is that they are utilising a defence which is actually a normal, healthy response to an abnormal situation. When we first began work in the UK well over a decade ago now, we weren't allowed to say that divorce and separation harms children. When we said it in public, there were sharp intakes of breath. The idea that divorce and separation causes harm to children was not something we were allowed to say, because that may have affected the way in which parents made their own personal choices about the relationships that they were in. And adult choices were more important than children's experiences at that time. As we've begun to work across Europe, particularly over the past 2 or 3 years, there has been a growing interest in this phenomenon called parental alienation, and rightly so. Because I'm in my late 50s now, and I've been doing this work with separated families for probably nearly 3 decades. I am now working with the adult children who were alienated when their parents divorced in their childhood. And what I experienced in doing that work with adult children who were alienated is that the long-term impact of unresolved alienation on children is significant, it is life-changing, it is life-limiting, and it is something which those children will go on to pass to their own children when they become parents. So I'm now working with adult children who are alienated in their own childhood, who are now alienated from their own children. So rather than becoming alienating parents, as many people believe alienated children will become, they actually grow to become estranged and alienated from their own children. And if we look at the impact of alienation and we look at what it actually is, which is what we're going to do this morning, it becomes very easy to understand why that happens. This is a transgenerational transmission of traumatic response to an abnormal situation. And yes, we can't change the world and take it backwards, and we can't say that divorce and separation shouldn't happen. It's going to happen. But what we can say, and what we must say now, we must say urgently, is that actually our response to the child's needs at the centre of divorce and separation must change, and it must change urgently. Because when a child raises the red flag of alienation and says, I am never going to see a parent again, that child is taking a responsibility that they are too young to understand and too young to bear the consequences of. And in responding to the crisis that we see in these children, we, as Judge Lana said, must have courage, and we must have determination, and we must be the adults that bear the responsibility for making decisions so that the children do not have to. Because alienated children are reacting to an abnormal situation by taking a responsibility that they are too young to bear. And as practitioners and as wise people around alienated children, we now have to step forward and recognise that we can do something and we must do something. Because if we don't do something, what we will do is continue to force children to hand on this trauma to the next generation. Now, Nick and I work in the United Kingdom, where the idea of parental rights is very strong. And the idea that parental alienation is a contact issue, it's a fight between two parents, has been very, very common for a long time. Is it a fight between two parents? Is parental alienation something to do with parental rights? Or is it a mental health issue? What we've come to understand is that it is a mental health issue. It is an impact upon a child that forces the child to defend against an impossible situation. And we're going to take you through our understanding and the way that we work with parental alienation this morning. So I want you to sort of sit back, perhaps not relax because it's not a relaxing subject. We will leave plenty of time at the end for discussion and for questions. And what we will try to do is locate what we're talking about in your socio-legal situation so that we understand the challenges that you face and that you understand how to translate what we're talking about into the work that we do. So I'll stop talking too much now and hand over to Nick, who will get us started.
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everybody. I think we thought it would be useful to start by actually just unpacking the term parental alienation, because I think many of you who will have looked at parental alienation perhaps in books, perhaps online, heard discussions about it, worked with these cases in your own practice, whether that's in the court system or whether that's in the mental health system. And very often what we find is that there are quite different descriptions of what parental alienation is. And I think before we kind of go much further, it's important for us to talk about how we conceptualise this particular problem. Very often I think people talk about parental alienation in terms of what one parent does to another parent. And of course, when you dissect the dynamics of a parental alienation case, what you find is that typically one parent is doing something or a range of things that is causing the child to reject. However, I think it's also important to locate the problem in the child, to recognise that this is a problem that harms children, and to start from the position and the experience of the child and then work outwards to begin to understand what's causing it. This is our current working definition of what we mean by parental alienation. So we describe it as a spectrum problem, by which we mean that it doesn't always present itself in exactly the same way, that very often the alienation reaction is one that can be very extreme, but in other cases it's less extreme. But we also recognise it as being what we call induced defensive splitting, and that's something that we're going to talk about in more detail. And those of you who work in the mental health field will perhaps understand already what we're talking about when we're talking about splitting. We're talking about a child who is unable to hold either their own internal experience or their experience of the external world in a single kind of unit, if that makes sense. It's a child who has to split the world into all good and all bad, and it produces a whole range of other splits within the child's psychology. This is a problem that happens within the context of divorce or family separation. Or perhaps more accurately, it's one that we first encounter when the family separates or divorces. In many cases, when we work with these families, we find that the fracture lines that have resulted in the alienation have been present for much longer than that. That the child has become aligned with one of their parents long before the alienation reaction becomes apparent. And I've just talked about aligning there. We talk about this as a problem of pathological alignment to one of their parents primarily, rather than the rejection. And again, we'll talk more about this, but I think it's worth just focusing on that. We conceptualize it, and, when you read about parental alienation, we always think about it in terms of the rejection of a parent. The reality, though, is that the rejection is actually simply a byproduct of the child's pathological alignment to the other parent. And as I say, we'll open this up more as we go forward. It's critical that we begin to conceptualize parental alienation not as a contact dispute or visitation dispute or care dispute or anything else, but conceptualize it as a child protection issue, because this is something, as Karen said, that has a huge and lasting impact on children. And we have to approach it from the health and welfare of the child if we're going to make the right kinds of decisions for the child. And typically, as I said, these cases appear to us, particularly as if you're working as a judge or you're working as a lawyer, but even if you're working within the mental health or social services field, this is a problem that appears to us when a parent comes and says, I'm no longer seeing my child. I used to see my child, but now I no longer do. And so what we do is we tend to think of it immediately as being about that problem, about not seeing the child. But there's a real risk to doing that. Because in reality, as I said, rejection is about pathological alignment. And that word's important, pathological. This is something that is deeply maladaptive in the child's behaviours. It's something that is causing harm to the child. And therefore we need to think of this as a child protection issue, as a child health issue, as an emotional abuse issue, if we're going to resolve the problem for the child. Fundamentally, what we're talking about here is a disruption in the child's ordinary attachment relationships. I think most people will have a working understanding of what we mean by attachment in theory. But if we go back to basics, what Bowlby and Ainsworth in the first instance told us was that children build relationships as a matter of course. They are evolutionarily predisposed to build these indelible bonds with both their mother and their father. So when we're born, we experience the universe as an entirely terrifying place. And we learn that we'll survive because those people who are closest to us look after our needs often enough and predictably enough for us to begin to believe that we are safe in the world. And we build relationships with our parents that are unique. So we have a unique relationship with our mother and a unique relationship with our father. And it allows us to go out into the world and explore new and unusual circumstances because we carry with us a sense of safety and security that's provided by our parents. And when you think about how that process works, we think about the infants from the very first moments of a child's life. We hold the child, we gaze at it gazes back at us. And in that process, the child begins to build this bond with us that becomes indelible. And as Bowlby says, it's the primary status and biological function of intimate emotional bonds between individuals, the making and maintaining of which are postulated to be controlled by a cybernetic system situated within the central nervous system, utilising working models of self and attachment figure in relationship with each other. Okay, that's quite technical. But the critical part of this is that what Bowlby's saying is this isn't some kind of optional extra that children have. They don't kind of just like their parents. This is absolutely fundamental to the child's survival. And the attachment relationship is located within the central nervous system. I think that begins to kind of explain how powerful this process is. And therefore, we can, from that, draw the conclusion that when a child rejects one of their parents, in the way that we see with parental alienation, there is something fundamentally wrong. There is a problem that needs attending to, because it is simply the most unnatural thing for a child to do to reject one of its caregivers. Attachment, if it's relatively successful, and I think it's important to say, you don't have to do anything particularly special as a parent for your child to attach to you. This is very, as I say, innate in the child. The child is predisposed to do this. And if you are available to the child in any way, the child will attach to you. The child will seek proximity with you. You see that in little children particularly. They'll be very close to you. And as they get a little bit older, they'll explore the world a little bit further beyond. And if something goes wrong, then the child will come back to their nearest attachment figure. Not because you can make the world better for them necessarily, but because they feel safe and secure when they're in your care. And here again, I think it's worth just pointing out that regardless of the quality of the parent-child relationship, children are biologically hardwired to form and maintain an attachment relationship with their caregivers. This isn't an optional extra. Attachment is a fundamental part of a child's development. It lasts for a lifetime, and therefore, if we see a disturbance in that, we should immediately recognise that there is harm to the child and there is a problem there. Now, if we think about that attachment experience, as I said before, children are attached uniquely to both their mother and their father. And they are able to, when the family lives together, they can move between one attachment experience and the other attachment experience in a very comfortable and fluid way. They simply move between being in the care of mother to being in the care of father without any particular trouble. The difficulty that children face, however, when their family separates is that they have to find a way to maintain those individual and unique attachment experiences, but in a fractured relational world. Now, for most children, over time they'll find a way of doing that and it'll become relatively comfortable for them. But for some children, it becomes increasingly difficult or impossible. And that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at those children for whom the ability to move and switch their attachment experience from one parent to the other parent has become so impaired that it's impossible for them to carry out. So then we have our child with mum and dad together. The child is sat comfortably in the same place as mum and dad are located, both physically, more importantly, psychologically. But the landscape changes dramatically when the family separates. This huge psychological gap opens up between the parents. The parents stay in their own individual place. They, mum's here, dad's here, both physically but also psychologically. It's the child, however, who has to do the psychological work of moving and switching their attachment responses from one parent to the other. So when they're with this parent, they'll feel safe, they'll feel secure, but then they have to power down, if you like, their attachment experience here, cross over this no man's land, and re-power up the attachment to that parent. And then to leave that parent, they have to power down and cross back over here. So children are already having to do quite a lot of psychological work, even in the best of circumstances. And then we have our child crossing backwards and forwards. But in certain circumstances, a child will begin to find that it's impossible to cross that, what we call the transition bridge. Now, I think that when we look at these cases, we are often looking in the wrong direction. The problem, as I say, appears to be the child's rejection. But when we're looking at that child's impairment to be able to cross that gap, what we really need to be thinking about is the pathological alignment to the parent that they get stuck with. And when we look at it, when we discuss this problem, when we think about it, that the discourse, if you like, around parental alienation is that this parent must have done something wrong for the child to reject them. And that means we're looking in the wrong direction, because the problem is really here in the pathological alignment. Karen, do you want to? So what is it that causes a child to align?
I think the idea of alignment and us all looking in the wrong direction is a really key issue for us to think about, particularly if we're working with rejected parents. Listening to and watching the video that was made by the Child Protection Centre really brings it home to me that the experience of being rejected by your child is like no other. It is a complex traumatic stress which is never ending. And so if there's one thing I want to get out across the world, it is that we have spent far too long looking in the wrong direction. Looking at what we can fix about the rejected parent. How can we make that parent better? How can we make it easier for the child to have a relationship with that parent? I wrote a blog recently, which was probably the most widely read blog around the world that I've ever written. I likened the experience of being a rejected parent to watching your child being hung over a crocodile pit behind a curtain. You as a parent could see it, but no one else could see what was being done. The other parent is hanging your child over a crocodile pit, putting your child in danger. You can see it and no one else can. And when you jump up and down and say, look what's happening, look what is being done to my child, everyone looks at you and says, see, you're crazy. It must be you. We just have to make you a little less angry. We just have to make you a bit more empathic. We just have to make you nicer for your child to want to have a relationship with you. I can't think of anything more traumatic than living that horrendous experience day in, day out. And so for me, helping people to recognise when they're working with separated families that they've been looking in the wrong direction and trying to fix the wrong parent is the key message that I want to convey. Because one of the most important people in an alienated child's life is the parent that they are rejecting. And as people who work in reunification, we know that without that parent and the healthy care and love that that child can receive from that parent, that child is condemned to repeat this transmission of trauma in their own lives. The rejected parent is the healthy hope for the alienated child's future. And so when we start to reconfigure our understanding of these families, as mental health practitioners, as legal people, we need to start to recognise that the rejection is a byproduct of the pathological alignment, which is emotional and psychological child abuse, and we have to intervene to stop it. Okay, what causes a child to align? Well, pressure. Pressure upon the child in which they cannot hold two realities in mind. Two realities being one parent's reality and the other parent's reality. The child is a very, very vulnerable, helpless being. They cannot make independent choices, and so often the only independent choice they can make is to adapt a defense of psychological splitting and create a false persona. And that false persona, which is actually a traumatic split, so that the child can cope, either the child dies or goes mad in the impossible situation, or they create a defensive split. That defensive split helps the child to continue to survive. But the byproduct is they have to murder their relationship with one of their parents in order to do so. pressure in the family system that prevents a child from holding two realities in mind is what causes alignment. It's sometimes overt, which means we can sometimes see it, we can sometimes readily spot it. But it sometimes looks like love. And this is the real problem for us as mental health professionals. What do you do when what you can see in front of you looks like love, looks like devotion, looks like the deepest care and the most perfect parenting that you could possibly witness, but it's actually abuse? How do we start to unpick that? It's interesting, over the past few days I've had a number of comments that come my way by email and on the blog saying, Karen, you're always talking about this issue in the post-separation landscape, but actually this started before we separated. This is a continuation of the dynamic that was already there. Please talk more about how it happens in family situations. And I think as we go along, we will start to look at how we can see it before the family actually separates, because it is there. And the crisis of family separation simply thrusts it to the surface and makes it very, very clear. Or it makes it very, very tight in what we call the interpsychic relationship. So the relationship, the interpsychic is the relationship between two people. The crisis of family separation often means that one parent pulls really hard in the interpsychic relationship on the child, and the child is then forced into an impossible situation. The child, you see, is aware of the power dynamics between their parents. You can all remember when you were children. You knew if your mum and dad weren't speaking to each other, didn't you? You could tell. You could tell by the silence that crackled when you walked into the room. You knew if somebody wasn't happy with someone, because when we're children, we are attuned to the world in ways that we forget when we become adults. Our bodies as children are attuned to the environment. We're like little creatures. We can smell, feel, sense what's going on in the room. And these children are often extremely sensitive, highly attuned, and they become like little weather vanes, they've got little antennae. They know what's going on. They know who has power. And they are always going to go with the person who has most power and who is willing to use most power, because they are helpless creatures. They cannot make independent choices. If they see that one parent is afraid of the other, they're going to go with the parent who is most frightening, because they see what's happening and they don't want it to happen to them. And the biggest fear for all children is abandonment. They don't know how they live if they don't attach to the person who has got most power, and that person is threatening to leave or threatening to abandon. How will these children survive? People say, why do children always go with the one that's the bully? Why can't they see it? Well, of course they can see it. But they know that if they don't go with the one who has the most power, they're going to get left behind. They're going to be abandoned, and that's their biggest fear. The overt messages that we see are stark. Making a child believe that they've been abused, making the child feel that they're unsafe in the other parent's care, and that can be very, very overt, or it can be covert. You know, a child will come back from playing at dance and say, we went on our bikes, it was great, we went all over the place, we had a fantastic time. Mum only has to turn her head and say, well, I hope you wore your helmet. To create a fear in the child that they were unsafe. Suddenly, something that was fantastic is reconfigured as being dangerous. And from these small little shifts and these small turns of the head, From these small little messages can come the most enormous, fantastical stories about how children have been abused in one parent's care, and it can create from there an absolute chaos in terms of how people believe what the child is saying and what the child is actually doing in trying to defend themselves against just very small shifts in one parent. Devaluing the role of the rejected parent, I think I have to say I do a lot of work with children who are either born of IVF or they are born in same-sex relationships. The biggest devaluation of a parent I can think of is to be referred to as the sperm donor. And I've got kids who have grown up having a father referred to as just the sperm donor. It's a devaluation from the very beginning. That's the most overt way of doing it. There are more milder ways of doing it, which can convey to the child that this parent is not really very important. One of the ways of doing it is to refer to the biological mother or the biological father, usually done when someone is trying to replace a father or a mother with a step-parent, convincing the child that this relationship is more important than that relationship. Involving the child in information about the parental relationship. We were working at the Child Protection Centre yesterday, and we were working on supervision, and we were talking about a mother who had said, finally, she has got to the age where she has come to understand the person that he really is. She now understands that he is this person. She has come to feel like I do. That kind of attitude fails to recognise that the child has an independent, different relationship to their father than a mother can have to a father. It is involving the child in the adult-adult relationship and assuming that that child now can feel the same way. That child can never be part of the adult-adult relationship. That child is a daughter or a son. That child is in a hierarchy, and the parents are here and the child is there. Involving a child in the parental relationship, bringing them to the same level, is one way of creating distance between that child and parent. And the strongest element of distancing a child from a parent is encouraging the child to make false or fabricated allegations. And these are a nightmare to deal with. False allegation will arise from a kernel of truth. So there will be something that you can trace it back to, but it's exaggerated, it's elevated, it's a story that has been bound around a kernel of truth. And a fabricated allegation is a deliberate, conscious lie involving the child to create damage for the parent that is being put at distance. And it binds that parent into an absolute nightmare. It is a Salem witch trial like no other. Because the child who is making an allegation against a parent is creating the most enormous smokescreen, which often cannot be properly cleared. And that kind of issue can hang over a parent's head for years and years and years. The interpsychic, so the relationship between two people which is silent, which communicates a great deal of information, but which isn't spoken about overtly. Shunning and abandonment. Again, the fear of abandonment is incredibly powerful. Shunning, in some tribes, is used as a way of destroying someone's life. Someone can be shunned, we call it sent to Coventry. I'm not quite sure why it's Coventry, but we call it being sent to Coventry. Being shunned, being shut out of your tribe, being closed out of your attachment relationship, can leave a child feeling hopeless, helpless, and as if they are no longer alive. Shunning is incredibly powerful. I once did some work with two extremely narcissistic parents in London. I was a kind of nanny for their children, and I carried these children across the transition bridge, metaphorically but physically. So I would spend time with the children with dad, and I would spend time with the children with mum, and I would be the person that accompanied the children back and forth. Now these were two very narcissistic parents. However, dad managed to be just a little less narcissistic than mum, and he could at least hold his children's experience of having two homes in mind. And he liked to do cooking and baking, so we baked some cakes one afternoon. Lovely cakes, beautiful cakes. The children loved doing it. He said to them at the end of the session, "I'll tell you what, why don't you take some cakes back for mum?" We put the cakes in a bag. We put the children with the bag and with me in the taxi. We drove across London. We arrived at mum's house. We got out of the car and the boys ran up the steps with the buns in the bag. An emblem of their time with their dad and their love for their mum and their dad. Their mother received the bag as if it had something dirty in it. She didn't even look in it. She threw it in the bin. I watched her throw those children's experience of their mother and their father in the bin as if it was something that they brought in from the street. And I looked at the little boys' faces and I saw the recognition in their faces that it is not acceptable in their world for the love that they feel for dad to be present in mum's home. And I saw that day the beginning of the psychological splitting defence, which will turn the two of those boys themselves probably into narcissistic parents as they grow older, at risk of losing their relationship with their own children. It's as subtle and yet as powerful as that. And it's deeply damaging, and it hands it on to the next generation. We don't often see overt anger because, alienating parents don't think that they're alienating. They think that they are loving, kind, charming, the best parents ever. So we don't often see expressions of anger. But the children know, because they're attuned to that parent, when that parent is angry. And often the anger that you see in this kind of personality is not the hot rage of explosive anger, but the cold, detached, terrifying rage, which is suppressed, but nevertheless incredibly powerful, and it's communicated in the interpsychic, and the child picks up on that. So the terrorization of the child through the interpsychic is very, very strong. But children also see their parents dysregulate, and they see psychological decompensation. They will sometimes see a parent crying because they have to leave. I had one little boy who said, I put all my love for my father into my shoes, into my feet, because then I can put my shoes on. And then mum can't see when I go to dad's house that I love him. And what I show her is that I'm unhappy, because I know she wants me to be unhappy. And when I said, how do you know she wants you to be unhappy? He said, because she's always crying when I go to dad's house. And she's always telling me how much she's going to miss me. So I have to hide the love that I have for my father in my feet so that I can take it secretly to his house. So the anxiety of the parent and the over-emotional state of mind leaks into the child's experience, and they know they have to hide it. When you talk with alienated children who we were discussing over the past couple of days at the Child Protection Centre, and we were talking about the way that these children will present, like, we call them porcupines, but you call them dickobrash, is that right? Dickobrash? So the angry, alienated child is like a spiky dickobrash. In Dutch it's called stegelwagen. And I often think when I see these children, they are like these spiky little creatures. But underneath these spikes, if you use the right approach with an alienated child, they will readily tell you what's happening to them. After reunification work, when I have moved a child from an alienated parent to we call them now the receiving parent, previously rejected parent, the children will tell us they knew all along what they were doing. They knew they had to keep part of themselves away. They knew they had to adapt their behaviour. They knew it was the only way to survive, and they knew they didn't want to do it. And they felt, at times, a link to the guilt and the shame that is caused by this defence. So they don't do this to parents because they want to, they do it because they have to. The anxiety that the child feels is hidden by the split, but it's nevertheless there. The other interpsychic messages which we see are the role corruption, the shifting of the child to a different place in the family hierarchy. So the child should always be child to parent. But these parents will move a child from the role of child to the role of pseudo-spouse. So they will be partners. Or the child will be moved to the role of parent to their parent. Parentification. We see lots of parentification, lots of spouseification in these children. They are in the wrong place in the family hierarchy, and they're taking the wrong responsibilities for their age and their place. Johnson, Walters and Olson tell us that parents who are alienating are those who have poor boundaries and who engage in role reversal with their children. They have difficulty distinguishing their own feelings from those of their child. The child is the parent's confidant. The child becomes party to everything that parent feels. There are no windows and there are no walls. I wrote a blog once called Growing Up in a House Without Windows and a Home Without Walls. And what that actually means is that the house without windows is the family which is isolated and cut off from the outside world. But the home without walls means that within this isolated place, the child has access to information about the internal family dynamics that they never should be party to. They know things about the parents, they know things about the past, they know information that they should not be party to. That's role corruption, and that's child abuse. Bowlby, in his work on attachment, looked at a pattern of insecure attachment that he termed compulsive self-reliance, in which a parentified child assumes caregiving responsibilities towards the parent. He hypothesized that because of their insecurity about the emotional availability of others, some parents turn to their children to meet their own emotional needs. They place developmentally inappropriate demands on young children to provide their parents with nurturance and comforting. And although these parents may be ostensibly protective, they may be kind and loving, parentification has negative implications for child development because the parents' emotional needs are being met at the expense of the child. And that's what we see in that video that we looked at. That mother told us that her child was not having his developmental needs met. He was not able to relate to others as he should be. And I see this in my work again and again and again. there's a particular presentation that you see in an alienated child, and the easy way to describe it is they look neglected, the lights are not on in their eyes, they do not do the things that normal healthy children do, and they struggle with interpersonal relationships. And I work with children pre-reunification, during reunification, and for quite a long time after reunification. I take photographs of them. And the dramatic difference in a child who has been reunited with a rejected parent and who has resolved the split is astonishing. It's like two different children. They are depressed, they are often shabby and dirty, they're physically unkempt, they look neglected, their needs in that respect are not being met. But the biggest difference is that the lights in their eyes, and remember in attachment theory, our attachment to other people is triggered through the gaze, so there's something about the mirror neurons in our brain which trigger attachment, which, we say the eyes are the windows to the soul. There's something about children's attachment being shut down, and when they're reunited with the rejected parent and the defensive split is healed, the lights go on, and they're there again. And a parent will say to me, it feels as if my child was once possessed and is now back to normal. They are who I remember them to be. And there is something really, really magical, if you can say magical, about this terrible, terrible thing that happens to families. There is something magical, because in all of these children that we have reunited over the past decade, when the lights come back on, and the parent that is receiving them is there to help and they're healthy and well, these children recover remarkably. Unlike overt forms of emotional abuse such as denigration or terrorization of the child, boundary dissolution takes more covert forms that may be veiled under a guise of parental solicitude, effusive warmth and camaraderie. Nonetheless, the burden of meeting the emotional needs of the parent interferes with the child's progress through development, which is the very definition of developmental psychopathology. And boundary dissolution is what we see again and again and again. And this is one of the most difficult things, and perhaps this is why it's taken such a long time for this issue to come to public consciousness, because this child abuse, this emotional abuse, looks like love. It looks like kindness. It looks like a solicitous relationship. The child looks happy, the parent looks happy, but it's not true health. It's a sort of one-dimensional happiness because of the split inside the child. I think I'm going to talk about transgenerational trauma reenactment briefly and then hand over to you, Nick. The splitting of the child can be, it isn't always, but it can be, a displaced trauma from the influencing parent. And I think Nick will talk a little bit more about what that looks like in a bit. The inducement of the child to reject the other parent is caused by the implantation of narcissistic splitting. This is the subject of my research. I have long been fascinated by ghost stories. So transgenerational haunting and transgenerational transmission of trauma absolutely does it for me. It gets me focused, it gets me thinking. And the inducement of psychological splitting by implantation of narcissistic splitting is a particular interest. I'm writing at the moment quite a lot about missing spaces in the narratives of separated families. And there is one particular part of attachment trauma which is fascinating, which is to do with transgenerational trauma reenactment. And that is when a parent has had an unresolved trauma in childhood, such as sexual abuse, They've not spoken about it, they've not dealt with it. It is reawakened in the life of their child through the attachment relationship that the child has had with that parent, because the child has attuned to the missing, unspoken spaces in that parent's world and is now living out this story in the here and now. It's quite a complex thing to talk about, and I'll write more about it, but it's something about how children sense the unresolved issues in their parents' lives and seek to meet the unmet needs of that parent. Can you just go back so I just want to finish by saying that in that transgenerational trauma reenactment, the inducement to split the self is not a defense against what's happening in the here and now. It's a defense against something that happened maybe 40 years ago. So although we find it impossible to believe that a child can know something that happened 40 years ago, nevertheless, in the attachment relationship, the child has absorbed messages which force it to split the self in response to the unresolved trauma in the parent. How on earth are we as mental health professionals and legal professionals supposed to detect that? We are not only being asked to believe the unbelievable and look in the opposite direction to the way we've been looking for 40 or 50 years, we're now supposed to be ghostbusters. We're supposed to be psychic detectives working out how to resolve trauma that happened 40 years ago. But if we look at forms of transgenerational psychotherapy, and we look at approaches such as psychogenealogy, we start to look at how we dig up the past in our work with families, all of that becomes possible.
I think that one of the key features that we often see in, not just in family separation in general, but particularly in alienation cases, is the triangle. The perverse or toxic triangle is one that I think is worth exploring in a little more detail, because this is something that we see quite often, particularly where allegations of sexual abuse come up. And those things, of course, can be very, very difficult, because when we first start to work with a case, we have no idea whether the allegation is true or is not true. And therefore, we are required to do the kind of forensic work that begins to uncover the reality of this. Now, clearly, the truth of what happened has to be determined ultimately by a judge and by a court. But as psychotherapists working in this field, we begin to do the excavation that Karen was talking about to help us to understand the specific dynamics of each case that we're working with, to understand what it is that's locked this child in the pathological alignment to one of their parents. The perverse triangle was kind of first described by J. Haley in 1977, and I think it's a very useful thing to think about. And what we're talking about here in this particular configuration of it is unresolved sexual abuse in a parent's past. And this typically occurs in mums. So it's when a mother has been sexually abused as a child, but that's been left unresolved. And mum has, in order to survive, has split that off. Let's use that term again, splitting. She has put it out of sight, and her life has continued, and she's been able to function very normally. But very often in the drama or the trauma of the family separation, her capacity to keep that under control, to keep that trauma out of her psychological experience of what's happening, becomes hugely impaired. And very often it floods out into what's happening. Now, again, this is something I think that psychologists in here will recognise. But let me talk you through this. So at the top of the triangle there, we have the aligned parents. So we're using the term aligned rather than alienating at this stage, because we don't know whether this parent is alienating. We only know that the child is pathologically aligned to her. The aligned parent has this unresolved trauma, and what they do is they project, which is an unconscious process, psychological process, they project their own trauma onto the child as if it was the child themselves that had experienced the trauma. And the reason that this is done, and as I say, it's done unconsciously, but the reason that it's done is because that parent needs to rescue their own inner child, the child who was left abandoned, who was abused as an infant. So the child in this triangle, with that projected trauma, becomes in the mind of the parent a victim. As I say, this is usually mums, and mum actually believes that the child has been abused. What it is her own unresolved projected trauma. But to complete the triangle, so we have the child now as the victim, so that the mother can become the rescuer. But in order to complete this psychological triangle, we need a persecutor, and that becomes the other parent. So when we're working with these cases, we have this very odd presentation of a parent who appears to genuinely believe that their child is being abused. The court has found that there is absolutely no evidence for this to have happened. But very often, the projection of the story is so strong that the child begins to believe that they've been harmed as well. It's what's known as a shared encapsulated delusional disorder. So this is a particular delusional belief in the mum. It affects only one part of her life. So she's not a generally delusional person. She functions very healthily in the world. But this unresolved trauma has created delusional belief that her child has been harmed. And so powerfully does she project that onto the child that the child begins to share the same delusional belief. These are very, very complex mental health problems. And I think that when we talk about how we begin to resolve these issues, the interlock between the mental health professionals and the legal professionals is absolutely critical, because both need to apply their own critical functions and their own forensic ways of examining cases to begin to unpick what's happening with them. We frequently see personality disorders present in parental alienation cases. The typical ones are narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, and what's now referred to as emotionally unstable, histrionic, paranoid delusional personality disorder. Some research is carried out in Switzerland showed abnormally high rates of paranoid traits within what we might call the cohort of alienated parents. So that's something that comes in quite often. Obsessive-compulsive disorders, sociopathic personality disorder, less common, but still occasionally present. But also things like bipolar disorder can begin to make a child's experience of being parented complex. It makes their capacity to be able to switch their attachment experience between mum and dad much more complicated. And intrusive parenting, again, is something that we see as being problematic, where a parent is so involved in the child's life that the child has no sense of their own agency, and therefore they get drawn into the narrative of that alienating parent. One thing that we've begun to think about much more as we've done this work is a concept from psychoanalysis called identification with the aggressor. As adults, if somebody threatens us, our typical response is to withdraw from them. We move away from them. We get out of their way because we feel that it's going to be unsafe to be in their company. But for children, of course, it's impossible for them to do that, because if it's a parent, then they are reliant on that parent for their care. And Ferenczi, who was a psychoanalyst, was a contemporary of Freud's, so we're going right back, he looked at this particular issue and identified that children who were terrified by adults who were out of control subordinate themselves like automata to the will of the aggressor. They look out to work out what the aggressor's desires are and tries to satisfy and gratify those needs. Completely oblivious of themselves, they identify themselves with the aggressor. The weak and undeveloped personality reacts to sudden unpleasure, not by defense, but by anxiety-ridden identification and by interjection of the menacing person or aggressor. Again, it's very technical psychoanalytic stuff, but what it's telling us here, in essence, is that children who are terrified by one of their parents don't move away from the parent, they get drawn closer to them. They have to find a way to convince themselves that this parent is safe. They convince themselves, again at a very unconscious level, but they convince themselves that they must be in the wrong, that their experience of this parent as terrifying must be a misjudgment. And so they become bound to this terrifying person. This terrifying adult, this terrifying carer, has to be appeased in order to stop them becoming angry or terrorizing again. And you can see there that when Karen asked the question, why is it that these children become bound to the terrifying parent, this is the mechanism by which it happens. So when the child feels that their attachment bond is threatened, they pathologically align with the threatening parent in order to avoid abandonment. They split off, so they dissociate from the threatened part of themselves and the abusive parent as separate object representation. So they unconsciously process this as though it was something else, as though it was not happening to them. And of course, anything that threatens to force the child to confront the split-off object, in this case, the terror of that parent. So if we say to the child, well, this parent is a terrifying parent and this parent isn't, then the child has to push that away. The child can't deal with that, because if they did, then they would have to accept that they're going to have to remove this terrifying parent in their life. So the child is doing all kinds of complex psychological gymnastics in order to survive, and they are drawn towards the parent who's the most psychologically terrifying for them. As in all experiences of trauma, the attachment system is hyperactivated in the traumatized child. So this is a pathological response to something that's happening. The attachment system is hyperactivated. They're on high alert all the time. And the child accepts the abuse because they're unable to survive without that parent. And I think it's absolutely critical that we recognise that this is childhood psychopathology. And it's a result of emotional abuse. We have to, again, come back to this idea that parental alienation is not about a dispute about where a child will live or how often they should spend with somebody. This is fundamentally, I should say, about the child's health and well-being and about the emotional abuse of that child. Karen, do you want me to?
Carry on.
I'll carry on, okay. It's important to recognise that whilst every case of parental alienation is unique, no two sets of dynamics are exactly the same, and no child is exactly the same. When we work with these families, when we meet these children, we can find similarities, observable markers that allow us a way into the case. We can see that this is something that looks like parental alienation and therefore requires us to investigate more. The first one is what we've described already, this pathological splitting. And what you notice is a marked lack of ambivalence in their relationship to their parents. So the world becomes everything is good or everything is bad. They will reject a parent not a little bit, but completely. They will love a parent not with some kind of conditions, but absolutely fundamentally. This is the very best parents in the world. And that split quite often extends outwards. The parent that they're rejecting, their whole family becomes rejected very often. The pets become rejected. The football team that dad supports is the worst team in the world. The town where they live is the worst place in the world to live. So these are very pronounced markers. And when you just need to talk to children. You don't need to, in many respects, to do huge amounts of kind of psychological testing. These things are on the surface if you're attuned to listen out to them. They will reflexively support the view and the position of the parent that they're aligned to. So they are stood at the very side of the parent that they are aligned with. And anything that this parent says or thinks, the child will reflexively, automatically uphold as being true and being real. these children will deny that they've ever loved one of their parents. So when they're rejecting a parent, when you talk to them, you say, tell me about the times before this happened, when it was better. And typically speaking, these children will say it was never better. I just used to pretend that I loved them. But really, I always hated them because they were always the surrogate parents. And you say, what about this photograph that I got when you were 7 years old and you were on holiday with your mum and dad? And again, the child will say, oh, well, I have to smile at that, because if I didn't do that, then my mum would get very angry with me and she would hit me. So these are children who will deny the reality even when you confront them with it. And if you confront them again, then the allegations will typically become bigger and bigger and bigger. And quite often they become quite fantastic for them. The child will have unreasonable and negative beliefs about a parent that are significantly disproportionate to anything that may be observable. And we'll look at this in a little more detail, this stark contrast between what's good and what's bad, and the lack of ambivalence that children have. But we will get all kinds of things. We will get allegations that range from the spectacular to the trivial and ridiculous. So at one end of the spectrum, we'll meet a child who will tell everybody who asks that they've been sexually abused, that they've been passed around for other people to be sexually abused. We've had a case where a child said that father injected his eyeballs with drugs in order to make his penis go hard. There were sex votes on parties that this boy was. There was murder, the captain was killed, and there was cannibalism. These stories are fantastical. At the other end of the spectrum, we get these very odd little things, whereas a child will say, I will never, ever see my mum again because she called me down for my meal and I haven't finished playing my computer game. And the child will, whether it's at this fantastical end or it's at the trivial end, will tell you this with absolute fervour, with absolute conviction that this is a good reason not to see that parent. Now they're telling me that because they recognise that I am involved in the system, and they're trying to convince me that there's a good reason not to see the parent. But more importantly, I think, they're trying to convince themselves that there is a good reason. Because if there isn't a good reason, then it would provoke intolerable guilt and shame in the child. Because remember what we said earlier, to reject a parent is the most unnatural thing for a child to do. And it's the absence of what we call regulating emotions. So guilt and shame are our regulating emotions. So the reason that we don't steal other people's cars is partly because if we do, the police are likely to come and arrest us, and we'll end up before the judge and be in prison. But the reason in most of our day-to-day lives that we don't steal other people's cars is because we know it's wrong. We feel it's the wrong thing to do, so we don't do that to other people. Now these children that we meet, these alienated children, have lost touch with those regulating emotions of guilt and shame. They will do anything and believe that they're justified in doing it. They will take money off the parents and say that's okay. They will throw hot drinks over parents and believe that that's okay. They will talk about that parent in the most terrible ways, the most disparaging ways, and believe, or at least articulate, that that is okay for them to do that. Because they've had to push their guilt and shame responses so far into their unconscious that they can no longer have any access to them. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for. Those are the things that we see that should be causing us cause for concern. It's less about what a parent may be doing, whether a parent's saying nasty things about the other parent. It's much more about the presentation of the child. And I want to just talk about this idea of estrangement or justified rejection. Because of course when you first meet a child, and these cases come to us as mental health professionals or as legal professionals, we can't actually know why the child's rejecting. We can't know this at the beginning. Perhaps there is a good reason for the child for rejecting, perhaps it's alienation. And the way that we begin to determine this is we look at what a justified estrangement is. A justified estrangement is usually a temporary rejection of a relationship with a parent that isn't accompanied by the clinical markers of parental alienation. It's as straightforward as that. The child isn't psychologically split and retains ambivalence in perspective to both parents. So if you meet a child who displays most or all of these clinical markers: lack of ambivalence, reflexive support for one of their parents over the other, denigration of the parents, the spread of the rejection to wider family and friends, the absence of any guilt or shame in the ways of the behaviour, and these weak or trivial or fantastical reasons for the rejection, then there's a very good chance that you're working with parental alienation. Do you want to carry on, Karen? I can see you looking interested in this. Okay. We've used this term splitting an awful lot, and I think it's important that we begin to unpack what we mean by splitting. Splitting is a psychological process that refers to the unconscious failure to integrate aspects of the self, so our own experience or our experience of others, or of experiences of things that have happened in the world. Now, splitting is an extraordinarily normal and healthy developmental stage for infants. So if we go back to people like Melanie Klein and those early writers around splitting, developmental splitting I should say, what they say is that when we're born as infants, we are bombarded by sensual experience. Touch, feel, sight, sound, smell. We come into this chaotic universe and we don't have the psychological functioning to be able to differentiate those different sensory experiences. And so what we do as infants, we employ a defense mechanism. Now, for those of you who don't know what I mean by a defense mechanism is an unconscious process that protects us psychologically from things that are too uncomfortable for us to be able to work with. So they protect our psychological process. Now, these children, as children should I say, they psychologically split the world into good sensations and bad sensations. And Melanie Klein talks about the child's experience of the mother and the child's inability to recognise that the mother who is present and feeding and offering the child all that it needs, all its sustenance, all its sense of self, is the same mother who is the mother who's not present, who's gone out of the room and is therefore absent and persecutory by her absence. And what the child does is splits mother into two separate object representations. Again, a bit of a technical term. But the child doesn't see mother as a whole mother. The child experiences mother as two separate objects. The mother who is here and is lovely and warm and gives me everything I need, and the mother who is not here, the mother who is persecutory and abandoning of me. And part of the child's developmental process is to work out that actually the mother who is absent is also the same mother who is the mother who is present. Object constancy. And the child achieves that in the first couple of years of its life. It's part of a normal, healthy developmental process. And most of us retain this propensity to psychologically split our sensations. It's a shortcut for us to determine whether something or somebody is good or bad. We all do it, it's normal, and it doesn't really cause us much harm. When we're talking about pathological splitting, however, this is a defense mechanism that's gone out of control. It's where, as an individual, we are unable to have ambivalent feelings again, so that something or somebody contains both good and bad. It becomes either all good or all bad. And this is what we see in alienation cases. And when this comes back, what we're talking about here is the child psychologically splitting because the world around them, the disturbance in the family structure, in the family dynamic, is so psychologically overwhelming for them that they have to split the world into good and bad. Just to reinforce, this is an unconscious, not conscious process. And so what they do is the child splits internally their own experience of what's happening, and then that's projected into the outside world, and they split mum and dad into one being the embodiment of everything that's good, and the other as being the embodiment of everything that's bad. And that's why we see this very, very distinct behaviour in children. That's why the reason they're talking about their parents in the ways that they do. Now, I just want to bring a bit of science into this, or a bit more science. For those of you, again, who work in mental health, many of you will know Ronald Rowan. He developed something called the Parental Rejection Questionnaire, which is a way of testing children's experiences of their relationships with their parents. And a number of researchers, William Burnett, Kathleen Ray, and a number of others, they decided to look at what happened if you used this particular tool, this acceptance rejection questionnaire, with different groups of children, and whether it was possible to see a difference between alienated children and children who weren't alienated in other forms. Now, it's quite a complicated graph, and it's quite complicated because it's somewhat upside down. But the acceptance rejection questionnaire is simply a set of 60 questions that the child scores 1 to 4. So if the child is very happy with the relationship with their parent, they'll give it a 1. If they're unhappy about an element of the parent's relationship, they'll give it a 4. So those of you who are good at mathematics will determine on 60 questions, where 1 is the highest and 4 is the lowest, the best score is 60. And the worst score you can get is 240. Okay. So these different groups of children here, first of all, they asked children who were living in what we would call intact families, so families that hadn't separated. Tell us about your relationship with your mother and with your father. And these are the results that they found. That the children, it was roughly what they call a PARC, a Parental Acceptance Rejection Questionnaire score of 93. So remember, 60 is the top, 240 is the bottom. And for both mum and dad, it was around about 93. Now that's about an 82% approval rating by my calculations. And what that shows us is that these children are very happy with their mum and dad, but there's 1 or 2 things about their mum and dad that they don't like, whether it's because mum gets shouty when she comes in from work, or dad sits and reads the newspaper rather than playing with us. There's something going on there that they don't like, and it's what we would call ambivalence. These children are able to experience their mums being both good and bad. Okay. They then asked a group of children whose parents are divorced. They put them through the same thing. And again, whilst their scores were slightly less high, so they were slightly more dissatisfied in their relationship with their mum and dad, what you'll see is that, again, they're both very, very similar. So these are children who are spending time with both their mum and their dad, and they like their mum and dad more like about the same, or not like, I should say, they're as satisfied in their relationship with mum and dad, more or less equally. They then did the same work with a group of children who'd been found to have been neglected and were no longer living with their fathers. So these were fathers who'd been found to have harmed their children. And they asked the children to complete the questionnaire. And in relation to their mother, again, we get quite a high score, just short of 100. It's less than the intact family, but it's actually higher than the children in this cohort here. When they asked about their relationship with their father, of course, it was less good. And why wouldn't it be? These fathers were found to have harmed their children. But what you'll see is, it's still at around, about 140? So a long way short, it works out at about 50% that does. It's a long way short of being complete rejection, the 240. But when they asked the children who had been found to be alienated about their relationships with their parents, look what happened. These are children who had been alienated from their father. Look at how they report their relationship to their mother. It couldn't get very much higher than that. It's almost perfect score. But for father, it's almost completely negative. And the same happens when the mother had been alienated. We find that the mother's score is almost at the lowest it could possibly be, almost up to 240, and father is almost perfect. Can you see how these children present very, very differently to all of these other groups, even these ones here, where father had been found to have harmed his children? They recognised that father had harmed them, and that's why his scores were lower. But they haven't completely rejected him, because they're attached to him, and we can't we can't reject a parent unless it's a pathological response. And for me, this is an incredibly important piece of research, because it begins to, I suppose, show in a quantifiable way what's happening to children that we experience when we work with them clinically. We can see these huge differences in the way that alienated children respond to other groups of children. And what they determined was that alienated children who were not abused often engaged in splitting and lack of ambivalence with respect to the rejected parent. Children who were maltreated usually perceived the abusive parent in an ambivalent manner. Results show that severely alienated children engaged in high levels of splitting by perceiving the preferred parent in extremely positive terms and the rejected parent in extremely negative terms. Splitting is not manifested by children in their family groups. And this, to me, is a key piece of research.
Just moving on from the results from the park to the use of the questionnaire. If you just go back a slide bit for me. The conclusions that Bill Burnett, Gregory and Kathy Ray and Ronald Bruno drew were that alienated children who were not abused often engage in splitting and lack ambivalence with respect to the rejected parent. What they're saying there is that the children split their parents into all good and all bad. And we used to work primarily with that idea that the sign of the external split of mum and dad, good, bad, was one of the primary signs. What we've come to realise over recent months in working with children who were alienated, adult children who were alienated in childhood, is actually that split of mum and dad into good and bad is a projection. It's not the primary split, because the primary split is in the child's own self. So the idea of the child suffering traumatic splitting because of alienation, because of pressure placed upon them, tells us that the primary split is of the child's own self, and that this splitting is a secondary projective split. So we're getting closer and closer to what's actually happening to the child, and in getting closer and closer, we're starting to understand truly what we can do to intervene. Because it's all well and good as understanding it. We can understand it to the nth degree, but if we don't know what to do, what's the point? When we work with children and we are identifying the splitting, we start with asking them three things. Tell us three things you like about your mum or your dad. And the person that's been rejected, there's nothing that they like about them at all. Whereas the person that they are aligned to is better than perfect. So they can tell you 103 things about the parent that they're aligned to, but they can't tell you a single thing about the parent that they're rejecting. Three things that your mum or dad is good at. I think, Nick, we were working with 3 children who were convincing you that there was nothing that their dad was good at, and you asked them, well, he must be good at something. Is he good at whistling? He wasn't even good at whistling. Wasn't good at anything. These children can't find a single thing that's good about the parent that they're rejecting. So simple projective tests in conversation with children will show you exactly what's happening. This is a questionnaire that we will use sometimes with older children. There's one thing all kids like to do, and they like to grade their parents. Ask a child to tick what they like and don't like about their parents. They can't pick up a pen fast enough. It's a great thing. But they will show you, when they complete this questionnaire, the reality of their splitting. Depending on who's been rejected, they will have nothing at all in the columns. The parent who is being aligned will be absolutely perfect. The signs and symptoms that were curated by Richard Gardner back in the early 80s are actually the symptoms of the defensive split. They are the symptoms of the child's taking up of an omnipotent self. So the omnipotent defense, which comes into play, I am now in charge of the family system. I know what to do to defend the parent that I'm aligned to and get rid of that other parent who's causing all the trouble. Is an omnipotent defense which gives rise to all of the signs that we see, which are regarded as the symptoms of alienation. Lack of ambivalence being the strongest sign of all, and the lack of guilt and shame, and the spread to wider families. It's very, very sad for these children. They not only reject a parent, they reject grandparents, they reject aunts, uncles, pets, anybody to do with the parent that is being rejected must be disposed of and must be regarded as dangerous and harmful to their well-being. And it's a tragedy that many of these children will live their childhoods separated from, afraid of, and defending against a family system that loves them. A family system which is half of who they are. So they lose the opportunity to draw upon family stories, family histories, family narratives, family attitudes, family values. They lose that opportunity. And that's a tragedy for these children. I think the key thing that we need to emphasise and re-emphasise is the emotional abuse. The parental alienation is emotional abuse. It's traumatic splitting caused by emotional abuse, causing the child to pathologically align with one parent and fervently reject the other. And the rejection of a parent is simply the byproduct of the pathological alignment. And if you are a rejected parent here today, or you are someone who works with a rejected parent, I want you to keep that absolutely in your mind. The rejection is a byproduct of the alignment. It is not the focus, and it is not the cause of the child's presentation. So, looking at how we identify alienation, we work with mild, moderate and severe cases of alienation. Mild cases of alienation are where the child will start to display some difficulties in moving between parents and will start to resist a relationship. Moderate cases are where a child is more strongly resistant. If you're a mental health professional, you may be familiar with the child who starts to refuse to go and see the other parent and the trouble that can cause between parents. Moderate cases of alienation will often very quickly escalate into severe, where the child goes over the tipping point and begins to absolutely refuse. And sometimes an event, called a trigger event, will cause the child to escalate the reaction. What the child is doing is coping as best they can until they can cope no longer. Traumatic splitting takes place, a false persona arises, and then the alienation reaction is complete. When we are working to assess the component dynamics, we're looking at power and control, because power and control is the issue that we're dealing with in parental alienation. Parental alienation is the coercive control of a child. It is the control of a child removing their choices, removing their capacities to hold two realities in mind and forcing them to align with one reality. So we look at the behaviours of the aligned parent, the responses of the rejected parent, cross-projection, sometimes, between two parents, environmental factors, which means the society that we are working in, and how skilled people are at understanding alienation, because sometimes we're actually working in an environment where the professionals themselves are working against the solution to the problem. They're trying to, they think they're doing the best that they can do. What they're actually doing is causing barriers rather than helping. And potential personality disorder. I have to say, personality disorders are rife in this area, and it is an extraordinarily difficult area to work in to try and resolve. In each of these sections, which is a way of analysing power and control, what's actually going on in the relationship between two parents, we will have a set of assessments that we will take the family through. Want to move on? But in all of our assessment work, we know that as mental health professionals, we are only part of the solution to the problem, because the power and control issue requires us to use the court to shift the power dynamic, to get us to the alienated child. Anyone who tells you that they can resolve an alienation case without using the court structure to do so is spinning you a fairy tale, is telling you something which is untrue, because what compels an alienated parent to go and resolve the issue? There is no compulsion. If that parent has control of the child's mind, they're not going to go into a clinical psychologist's office, they're not going to go into a psychotherapist's office willingly, they're just going to keep doing what they're doing. And so the only thing that we have that can shift the power dynamic is to use the court to help us to get to the child. Because we have to use power to make the alienating parent do what they don't want to do. So one of the first things we'll say to an alienating parent is, we want you to bring the child to see the parent that they're rejecting. We will use what we call a head-on collision approach. We will confront the family with the reality of what they're hiding from. So we will use all of the legal consequences available to compel behavioural change. And we use a concurrent assessment and treatment approach, which means that we use a 12-week programme where we put the family under such scrutiny, guided by the court, using the judge as the super parent. We put the pressure onto the family system so that the truth pops out. And in this process, the truth pops out.
This is, I suppose, just a kind of an attempt to describe the way that we carry out our assessments. As Karen said, we don't carry out assessments in an hour and a half in an office. We go and work with the family where they are. And we look at the interactions that there are between all the different family members. And we start with a very wide hypothesis. We use the court paperwork to give us a starting place to try and understand what's going on. And then as time moves on, so we're going from top to bottom there, we test and then refine our understanding. We check for our own internal biases and all of those kinds of things. We say, okay, this looks like parent X is deliberately alienating the parent. Let's see if that's true or not. And we'll do something that tests whether a parent will do the thing they don't want to do. So bring the child. You've told me that you want nothing more than for this child to have a relationship with their other parents. Well, let's make it happen. Bring them on Tuesday. Can that parent respond? If they can, how do they respond? And the way that we test the response is not what the parent says, but what the child does. We have to remember that the litmus test of how successful things are, the litmus test of what's going on in the family, is not what the parents say they'll do or what they say they're trying to do. it's what the child is able to do. Because the child is the weather vane. The child is the one who will tell us through their actions what's going on in the family. And by the time we've tested it and tested it and tested it, we get to what we would say is a proposal for implementation. As Karen says, we use the power of the court to neutralise the power dynamic in the family. And we carry out our assessment to understand the cause of the child's rejection, and then we propose a treatment route that matches the specific assessment. Remember, each of these cases is unique. We use a differential assessment process, by which we mean we are looking at the different layers of what's happening to ensure that the treatment route that we propose matches the specific need of the child. And the key thing, as Karen said, to working with these cases is the legal and mental health interlock. Judges can't do it on their own, psychologists and psychotherapists can't do it on their own, but when the two work together in consort, you have the potential to make very powerful change for these children. We have to restore the functioning family hierarchy. Remember what we said earlier on, these children have become the head of the family. They're the ones who feel they've got to sort the world out, that they're the ones who are responsible for managing the world. The alienating parent is pushing them to the top of the family system. Very often the parent will simply stand behind the child and say, well, I can't make the child do something the child doesn't want to do. In these cases, what we need is somebody else to take charge, and the person that can do that most effectively is a judge. The judge becomes the super parent and heads up the family hierarchy and says, you will do this because I am telling you to do this. It's incredibly powerful. That therapeutic change is only possible when the imbalance in power is neutralised by the court. We can't work otherwise. We just go round and round in circles if we don't have that change in power. And the court has to utilise the threat of realistic sanction in order to constrain the behaviours of the alienating parent. You know, if you just ask a parent to do something, they'll do it or they'll not do it depending on a whim. If you compel them to and say, if you do not do this thing, then something will happen to you. You know as professionals what those possibilities are, but ultimately the sanction is if you don't do what you're required to do by this court, then we will remove your children from you and either place them in the care of the parent they're currently rejecting, or we will place them in the care of an institution or the foster family. And those messages need to be very, very clear right from the very beginning. I am the judge, I am in charge, you will do what I say. It's important that mental health professionals are protected. The work that we do is very tiring. We're working with people who are very unstable a lot of the time. They will make complaints. It's a very litigious space to be working in, and it's the court that can give them protection by investing the power of the court in the therapist. And the way that you do that is to include it explicitly. Now, I don't know what the mechanism is exactly here in Croatia, but the way that we work in the United Kingdom is we use what we call a composite order. Composite simply means a detailed order. And these are the conditions that we require before we will take on any case. We have to be accorded the status of an expert who can report to the court. The court must retain oversight for at least the duration of the intervention so that it stays within the court process, it's not moved out. The practitioner, so the therapist, has the right to return it to court at any point that they feel that things aren't working or that the parent is failing to comply. And the court must give permission for the practitioner to see the child in clinical observation. No observation of the child is complete until you've seen the child with the rejected parent. And if the aligned parent won't allow that to happen, then there needs to be sanctions to either make it happen or to say, you've had your chance, we're going to do something else now.
I'm just thinking, we've been talking for a long time, so it seems to me that a lot of the information that we've given you will start to disappear quite rapidly from your minds unless we give you a rest. So just to wind up the lecture, okay. The thing about therapy is it's no good using generic therapy. The therapies that we use must be adapted. What's going on at the Child Protection Centre is very, very exciting, because what we've got here are colleagues who are highly experienced in working with traumatised children, and they are already beginning to adapt their skill set to be able to meet the needs of alienated children. And actually what's going on at the centre is exemplary. It is a shining light of good practice, best practice in this field. And here in Croatia, you are ahead of the curve. You have people who are already working in a space which is seeking to protect children from this ever happening in the first place. And of course, getting upstream and stopping this happening is what we all want to do. And so I'm incredibly excited to see that already the expertise that's held at the centre is being adapted to meet the special needs of alienated children and their families.
You want to do that?
Yeah, to wind up really, what we're doing at the Family Separation Clinic in London is reuniting children, not in the distant future, but as swiftly as we can. We're using a child protection model to heal the psychological splitting, because it's that splitting which is the root of parental alienation. And again, colleagues at the Child Protection Centre are already working on traumatic splitting, are already working on adaptive therapies, are already working on robust interventions to bring about resolution to this problem. So the partnership that we have is incredibly important to us, because it is working together as professionals which will take this evolving field forward. There's an awful lot of splitting goes on between professionals in parental alienation. And if you read on the internet, you will see that I'm attacked regularly by other professionals, that there are arguments that erupt. That's not helpful. It doesn't help anyone. When we're here in Croatia, as in other European countries, and we're working with colleagues who truly understand the issue and are committed to taking this issue forward, it is both restorative for us, and it's incredibly powerful for this generation and the next generations of alienated children, because it allows us to get on and do the work that we do. So it's incredibly important to have that collaborative practice. I just want to finish by talking about the voice of the child. The voice of the child in the United Kingdom is frankly a nightmare. In that many social workers and guardians at Brighton will simply listen to what the child is saying and do what that child says they want to do. Worse than that, they're asking the child to decide which parent they want to live with. Can you think of anything more ghastly than burdening a child who is already traumatised with a decision about who they want to live with? What's going on when practitioners are relying on the voice of the child as it is simply expressed is that they are asking an abused child whether they want to live with an abusive parent or a healthy parent. And as we know, in defensive splitting, the child is always going to choose the abusive parent. We have institutionalized collusion with abuse. And it's happening in the United Kingdom, and we challenge it, we push forward, but we still get pushed back. What we should be looking at are the ascertainable wishes and feelings of the child. We should be analysing why this child is speaking as they are, understanding the traumatic splitting, and we should be, as adults, making the decision which is right for the child, to live with the healthy parent and protect the child from the abuse that they are suffering. Richard Rorschach tells us, children align themselves with the parent they most fear, or the parent they regard as most unstable. Although these children may be outspoken in their custodial preferences, their wishes may not reflect their genuine best interests. giving children's wishes and feelings paramount weight in determining the outcome of such cases burdens children with a terrible responsibility and impossible task of managing the adult world around them. I think that is something which stays with me. It's printed on my heart and soul. To finish, what I want to say about working in Croatia is that for me it is sustaining, it is inspiring, it feels as if it's a collaborative practice which is bringing the very best of what mental health practitioners and what the legal system can do to the table, with courage, with determination, with absolute guts to work against a system which is deeply conflicted, deeply broken in many places. It feels to me when we're here, as in other parts of Europe, and we're all working together, that actually something which has been hidden for too many years. This is a hidden child abuse scandal. It's been hidden for 50 years or more. These children are emotionally abused, and when we're working together, we're bringing the best of who we are to the table to bring this issue to consciousness and change the world, not only for the children in the here and now, but for the children of the future and for their children too. And I want to say thank you to everyone that we work with here, everyone who works tirelessly, and I know how difficult it is, for inviting us here and allowing us to speak and to share our knowledge, but most of all, for taking the work that we've done and making it real here, but also taking it forward. Here is innovation, here is creativity, here you are pushing boundaries. So I want to thank you for doing that and for allowing us to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Nick, so much for all the knowledge, supervision, and great friendship that I can say we now have, and for all your kind words for our center and for your support, because in some periods of times, especially this one, this is really important to have support from experts like you are, so thank you so much from all of us. And I believe the interest for questions is very high because a lot of people are here. So I'm going to invite people to ask questions in Croatian now, okay? Dakle, ako neko želi komentar, pitanje za predavače, također za sutkinju Petar Kuružić, imamo live stream preko Facebooka, dosta ljudi nas gleda, tako da i vas na Facebooku pozivam, ako neko želi komentaru ostaviti svoje pitanje ili neki komentar, pa ćemo pročitati i pokušati raspraviti neke od njih.
Hvala lijepo. Trebamo se predstaviti ili?
Možete hrvatski, engleski,
Hrvatski je tako davno. Hrvo Jukić odvjetnik. Vezano na ono što ste zadnje rekli, za postavljanje pitanja djetetu oko toga s kojim roditeljem bi htjeli živjeti. Kako to kao stručnjak tumačite, odnosno rekli ste da je to zapravo neka vrsta zlostavljanja, dakle da li je moguće u procesu recimo vještačenja pred sudom da vještači postave takvo pitanje, tako bi odgovor, odnosno kako vi tumačite to kao moguće zlostavljanje djeteta od strane stručnjaka? Hvala.
So he is Hrvo Jukić, he is a lawyer and he usually represents parents, right, in custody issues. So he wants to know a little bit about asking the child who you want to live with. So you said it's also kind of abuse. And if the court gives a question to an expert to decide that, then the expert is required to know the willingness of the child and the child wishes. So the question is how to do that by not abusing the child at the same time.
Da li postavljanje takvog pitanja zapravo zlostava od strane takve osobe stručnjaka?
So when an expert asks a child that question, is that also kind of abuse?
Okay, so what we're talking about when we're talking about children's wishes and feelings, We're talking about their expressed wishes and feelings as a child who is in an abuse situation. So they are saying that they want to live with the person who is harming them. Now, it's very easy for us to understand if a child's legs are being broken. We're going to listen to them say, well, I really want to live with a parent that's breaking my legs. And we're going to say, well, that's not okay, because we're the adults and we don't want your legs to be broken because that's harmful to you. The thing about emotional abuse is that it's often taking place in relationships which look on the outside to be extremely loving and extremely warm. But if as experts we are looking at alienation, and we know that we're looking at alienation when the child is showing extreme forms of splitting, as we've seen in the graph that Nick talked about. As experts, what we have to be able to do when we're listening to children telling us that they want to live with the parent that is causing this splitting, is we have to hear the wishes and feelings, but we have to analyse them in the context in which they are being expressed. And that means that we have to analyse the dynamic, we have to convey that dynamic to the judge, and we have to be able to explain how that dynamic is damaging the child's life chances. As I say, it's extremely easy to do that if someone's breaking a child's legs or stubbing out cigarettes on their arms or sexually abusing. But if it's emotional abuse, it's less easy. So is it abusive to ask the child their wishes and feelings? Well, I think hearing the child's wishes and feelings in an objective and non-confirmatory way. So I always say when I'm hearing a child's wishes and feelings, well, I hear what you're saying, I don't have the power to make decisions. The judge is the person who makes decisions about your life, and the judge will make decisions about who you need to live with based on who the judge feels is the best person to give you a relationship with both of your parents. And that's not an abusive approach. That's hearing the child's wishes and feelings, but reporting them in the context of the environment in which they're arising. But if it's hearing the child's wishes and feelings and then just reporting it slavishly as being this is what should happen, of course it's abuse. Because if you were hearing the child's wishes and feelings in a case where the child's legs were being broken, and you were to say to the judge, I think that the child's wishes and feelings are this, knowing that the child's legs were being broken by this person, you would be furthering that abuse. So it is the slavish reporting of the child's wishes and feelings without analysis, which is an abusive act in my view.
Can I add something, please? So there are many ways of asking that question. It's really abusive to ask the child, do you love more your mom or dad? Or do you want to live with your mom or your dad? But some people are well educated and trained to do that in a non-abusive way. And I think those are the people who should be doing that. So no neighbor or no mom or no dad, but some experts should do that in a non-abusive way to each other.
Mogu dodati malo pravne strane. Konvencija o pravima djeteta, članak 12, kaže mišljenje djeteta. Svi u sustavu, institucije, svakako i sud treba pribaviti mišljenje djeteta. Ali, jednako tako na taj članak 12 konvencije bio je komentar Ujedinjenih naroda njihovog savjeta koji je upravo govorio o tome da taj princip da čujemo mišljenje djeteta ne znači da će svaka institucija uvijek donijeti odluku onako kako je mišljenje djeteta. Dakle, najbolji interes djeteta je nešto što je iznad ovoga što dijete kaže. Prvo utvrđivanje da li je neko dijete pod utjecajem jednog roditelja ili drugog roditelja ili neke familije, pod utjecajem nečega što možemo protumačiti sa stručnjacima koji će nam reći o šta i o kakvom djetetu se radi, da možemo zaključiti da li taj glas djeteta kojeg čujemo, dakle njegovo verbalno iskazivanje, doista je ono što bismo trebali reći da je realitet. Dakle, sva ta procjena koja ide je uvijek uz saslušajmo dijete i čujemo dijete, ali to ne znači i to nas još dalje obvezuje kada donosimo odluku da itekako pazimo da ćemo reći čuli smo mišljenje djeteta, ali smo donijeli odluku takvu i takvu, koja je recimo suprotna njegovom mišljenju i obrazlažemo zašto.
Ali ono što sam htio pitati, da mogu samo nešto kažem, da li postavljanje takvog pitanja zapravo dovodi do tog dodatnog sukoba lojalnosti kod samog djeteta u odnosu prema roditeljima?
Yeah, I think I told that, but maybe you can wrap it up. So he's asking asking the child a question about the mom. I'm just translating. So is this deepening the pathological splitting?
I would never ask a child directly who do you want to live with. I don't think it's the child's responsibility to do that. It's an intolerable question. How can a child split its attachment relationship like that? I think we should be beginning to understand what's in the best interest of the child. It's worthwhile listening to what the child, how the child experiences their life. I think we should be taking those things into consideration. But I think that if we place that burden on children, then we are at risk of furthering any potential for splitting of them.
Pitanja?
Dobar dan svima, ja sam Dejan Pavlović iz Novog Sada iz Srbije. Hvala puno na ovom predavanju. Puno smo saznali, pa imam i puno pitanja, ali neću na to da postavljam što ste pričali. U Srbiji je trenutno tek na početku prepoznavanje ovog otuđivanja dece od roditelja i interesuje me koliko realno ima šanse da se to u nekoj zemlji, ne samo u Srbiji, nego i u Sloveniji i u Makedoniji, odakle idem, naše kolege u stvari imaju isto pitanje, za koje vreme može ovo da se sprovede u sistem, za koje vreme, ja sam inače socijalni radnik, za koje vreme mi u socijalnoj zaštiti možemo nešto da uradimo i da brže prepoznamo otuđivanje. Hvala.
Hvala. It seems to me that change comes about because people want change to happen, and therefore it requires people who are interested in bringing about change working together and collaborating. Because we've been doing it for quite a long time in the United Kingdom, I think people imagine that it was always a place where you could begin to work with this. What I would say is, first of all, we still run into difficulties. It's not every court that accepts it. It's not every area of the United Kingdom, for example. In different parts of the country we get different responses. But the way that we began to make change was by finding some people who were committed to seeing what could be done differently, and then proving case by case that you got better outcomes by using certain approaches than by using other approaches. So we first worked with judges who were becoming frustrated by seeing the same cases coming every 6 months, every year, the same families in the same courts with the same problems. And we said, okay, we've got a different approach to working with this, and we'll show you how this makes a difference for this child, for this family. And by doing that and being successful, of course the judicial world is a very small world, and it's easy then for people to pass on the successful knowledge. And if you've got social workers, if you've got prosecutors potentially, if you've got lawyers, if you've got therapists, if you've got psychologists, and if you've got judges, even if it's just in one area, even if it's just one part of Belgrade or Zagreb, that is able to demonstrate how you can bring about different outcomes by using the frameworks and protocols that have been established, then you can begin to make change through it spreading out.
I would say that change is coming across Europe faster than it's ever occurred. And we have a Serbian colleague with us who is already doing this work, who is already pushing the ideas forward to is already working with families to demonstrate the difference that you can bring when you intervene properly. And so, although it can appear to take a long time, and although it can appear that the United Kingdom is ahead, let me tell you, we are not in some places as far ahead as colleagues are in Zagreb. We were talking a couple of days ago about preventing parental alienation, and that's an astonishing concept for the United Kingdom, which at the moment may look from the outside as if we are far ahead, but in actual fact we're still pulling the bodies out of the river downstream. Getting ahead of the curve and starting to do preventative work it's very, very innovative, and it's much further ahead than many places in the United Kingdom. So I don't think that there's a prescription for how long it takes, but what I see in our work, and we've been in Poland and Romania, we're in touch with colleagues in Belgium, in France, in Germany, there is an increasing shift towards understanding and recognising this as emotional abuse across the legal and mental health fields, and there is a growing requirement from rejected parents that people recognise this and understand that it can be intervened. When all of that comes together, we will reach a critical tipping point much faster. So I can't put a timeline on it, but I think we will see significant change in the next possibly 2 or 3 years.
Hi, my name is Eden. I'm from the Croatian Association of Equal Parenting, but also from the Bosnian Association for Equal Parenting, since I'm a parent which has a case of this child separation. To connect it to the question which Dan is referring to, how do you make sure that the system, meaning sort of social workers and the legal, the courts have a better understanding, and how are they getting your message across to what you're trying to change and to what you're trying to do? Because in Croatia, I feel that there's a big discrepancy between what you're preaching right now, which is very, very motivating, and reality, which is very much different. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I was just pointing to Karen there. I think that the fact that there are so many people who are interested enough to come today to hear more about and think more and discuss more this problem suggests to me that there is an increasing awareness, and I understand your frustration. I think you still encounter, we still encounter a system that doesn't understand this well enough, that doesn't offer the training to professionals as a routine thing. And for me, one of the biggest changes that we could make is to incorporate understanding parental alienation within basic social work training. I think that would make a huge difference. But it's difficult to do this all at once, and I think that if you at the top have a judiciary, and the Ministry of Justice and whoever it is taking an interest in these things and is demanding those things. So when a judge has an expert witness or a social worker in the court, the judge is saying, hang on a minute, I want to know what's going on here. I think that can begin to make a change, because then the requirement is set from the very top.
I just want to say, please don't assume that in the United Kingdom, Nick and I are regarded as being the sort of leaders of positive change, because I can tell you, we are a small organisation which meets an enormous amount of resistance. We have some judges who absolutely love what we do and will require us to be in cases, but we are met with huge amounts of resistance. Our social work system is still based in the 1980s. It's still very much framed around women's rights, and children should be with women, with their mothers, and fathers should be paying child maintenance. So it is not the case that we are regarded as being even best practice in some areas of the United Kingdom, but in other areas we are. And I think what's happening as we get the message that this is not about parental rights, it's not about contact, this is a mental health issue. These are children who are being abused, and the system has colluded with that abuse for 50 years. Now the system isn't going to like that when we say that. The system is going to want to cover its tracks. It doesn't want to be exposed in any way. And those people who have looked the other way while this has been going on, and particularly who are continuing to look the other way in these years where we're bringing this to the surface, they're going to push back. They're going to fight back. But what we've got going on here in Croatia is a judge who really understands it, who understands that it requires courage and determination, who understands all the subtle nuances and is prepared to take charge of that. When you have a judge who is willing to take the role of super parent, then the rest of us can get in line. You know, we can all learn to do what we need to do in order to resolve these problems. And although it may seem that in Croatia there is a small team, maybe one or two judges who understand it, and that's not enough. And it's not enough, but it's where change starts. And from events like this, we're already talking about a bigger European event to share expertise, to spread knowledge next year. From events like this, greater change will come. And I really do believe that in the next 5 years, the reality of what these families have suffered, what these children have suffered, what parents have suffered, will be uncovered, will be exposed, and the way to address it will be recognised, and we'll all start to get in line and do what we need to do.
Thank you.
So I would like to ask a question from a lawyer perspective, who is representing maybe not only the rejected parent but also the aligned parent. You said we should not take into consideration the opinion of a child. Is the parent, in this kind of proceeding, also considered a child? Should we let them give their opinion, emotional opinion, which is probably be that way, all the way through, or should a lawyer and a judge try to emotionally stable the parent, what they're saying, and try to represent what they're talking about and try to kind of convince them they shouldn't be being so emotional, or should we let them express their emotions fully in that proceeding?
That's a great question, and it's a dynamic that we see again and again. So who is the child in proceedings? So this idea that alienating parents or aligned parents are dangerous, damaging, desperate people who should just be condemned and pushed out of the way is an extraordinarily difficult concept for those of us who are working in the mental health field, because our clients are people who suffer from mental health problems. But what we have to recognise is that in these very difficult cases, in these very litigious situations, we have to act to protect the child in the here and now. It is the child in the here and now who is the child that we are responsible for. And that's the child that we must work for. And whether or not it's judges or lawyers' responsibility to calm down the person who has unresolved trauma and who is playing it out in the family separation, is a difficult question. I often work with lawyers who do a lot of calming down of parents in order to get them to present their best self in court. But in actual fact, if they're presenting their best self in court, and that's skewing the outcome for the child in the here and now, is that a good thing? I actually think that these cases need to be displayed for what they really are, and the judgment needs to be made about how to protect the child in the here and now. And that must come first. And the work with the parent who is aligned or alienating because they are traumatized themselves has to be secondary. Because we are responsible for children. We are the adults who are responsible for children in the here and now. So I don't know, maybe Judge Lana will have a view on that, maybe Nina has a view on that.
stalno razmišljamo o tome, govorimo o mišljenju djeteta i građanskim sucima, odnosno obiteljskim sucima koji donose odluke. Ne mislim da je sud child-friendly mjesto. Ne mislim da je mjesto djetetu od 5, 8, 10 godina da ga stavimo u sredinu sudnice i da dopustimo jednoj i drugoj strani da postavljaju pitanje i da se dijete osjeća loše i još da mu stavimo dvoje roditelja iza leđa. Mislim da je to toliko neprijateljski ponašanje prema djetetu i da očekujemo od njega da on kaže ili nešto iskaže o tome što bi željao. Dobili smo puno prostora vezano za kazneno pravo gdje imamo posebne sobe gdje ispitujemo djecu sa stručnjacima koji su educirani kako razgovarati s djetetom. Stalno se zalažem sa građanskim sucima da je to jedna od mogućnosti kako razgovarati sa djetetom. Opet govorim razgovarati, ne ispitivati djetetom, razgovarati sa djetetom na način da educirani psiholog u posebnom prostoru razgovara sa tim djetetom, da tu snimku puštamo na raspravi, da ona služi u jednom dijelu kao dokaz, da nam stručnjaci razjašnjavaju zašto je dijete reagiralo na neki način, zašto je odgovorilo na neko pitanje, ne postavljati pitanje s kim ćeš ti živjeti i s kim želiš živjeti. S time se uopće kao kolega ne vjerujem da se u današnjem 21. stoljeću trebamo pitati je li to dobro pitanje za djecu. Ili doista mislimo da toliko imamo malo stručnjaka da si svašta mogu dopuštati. Dakle, zalažem se da čuti dijete što kaže, razgovarati sa djetetom na child-friendly način, sa educiranom osobom, u posebnom prostorom i uvijek se zalažem ne na sudu, ne na tako, ja bih rekla, neprijateljskom mjestu gdje će dijete, naime jedna istraživanja nam govore da dijete kada ulazi u sud prvo misli da je ono krivo, da je nešto napravilo i da će ga neko zatvoriti. Dakle, ajmo ostaviti da malo dijete ostane malo dijete i da do svoje, vratimo se nazad na konvenciju, 18. godine ima pravo o tome govoriti, ali nemojmo ga prisiljavati na način da bude u neprijateljskom okruženju.
Hvala.
We have one Facebook question, so I also modern. So the question is, are there some cases where we have adults that have been alienated as children and now they're in some kind of treatment, therapy, and then they reunite with rejected parents?
Yes, indeed. As our work with alienated children and families is more and more known about, we have adult children, adults coming forward who were alienated as children, asking for our help to either find a parent that they rejected in their childhood or work through issues that they had. Even though many alienated children will reunite with their parents as adults, they find that there are still issues that they have to deal with, and they will still talk about walking around on eggshells, so feeling that it's not possible to have a normal, healthy relationship, because, of course, that adult has not healed the splitting. The traumatic splitting is still in place. What we know about adults who are alienated as children is that they all say the same things. They speak about feeling that there is some unknown person inside of them and that they can't trust what they say in case this other person changes their mind and says something different. Now, who is that other person? That other person is the adult child's authentic self. And what they're experiencing is a split self. And they're trying to resolve it. And they can't resolve it. And they don't know what's happened to them. So what we're doing at the clinic is we're developing a form of psychotherapy which uses transgenerational concepts and psychogenealogy, which is basically digging up the past, in a safe environment to help the child confront the split and integrate the split, to to go back over things that happened and to experience them in a safe environment with the parent that they rejected, so that the authentic relationship can be fully recovered. And our model of working at the clinic has been to work case by case up until this point, but it's got to a place now really where we recognise that case by case doesn't cut the mustard, as we say in the United Kingdom. It doesn't do enough. We need replicable models. And so our focus at the moment, my focus in my research work, is in developing a new form of therapy that we can train therapists to use, so that parents, children who are alienated, adult children who are alienated, can find a way back fully to the parent that they rejected, and can recover the whole range of healthy experience of that parent. And the full range of healthy experience, of course, is not just in recovering that relationship with their parent, because that's the projection. The full range is integrating the split self and recognizing that that other person that they feel exists inside of them, a person that's unpredictable and might change their mind at any moment, is actually a split off, denied part of themselves, which they can now integrate and welcome back and get access to the whole authentic self that they were denied when they were children. So yes, we are doing that work, and Mia, we were talking a couple of days ago about adaptive therapies, about the skill set that you all have at the clinic, and I hope that the clinic will work with us and test this new form of psychotherapy for adults who are alienated as children.
I cannot talk in behalf of Professor Woodall, but I'm almost sure she will be more than willing to do that and apply that at the center.
Good.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the lecture and everything you've done. I'm Nicka Woodalla, psychologist from the Women's Room, Center for the Sexual Rights, and the coordinator of the Center for the Survivors of the Sexual Abuse. So the thing that I think is very important to say, and I'm not sure it's been stressed enough here today, that in the context of our society is that we are full of domestic abuse. And unfortunately, very often we see that the abusers use this very important topic and discredit it in that way because they use the fact that the child has a right with both parents. And unfortunately, in Croatia, domestic abuse and domestic violence, as we all know here, is not treated well. Our system has a lot of flaws and we are trying to solve them, but still we are very slow. And I'm not sure whether I have a question or this is just a comment, but my question maybe is, do you see that in your experience that abusers are using the right of a child to both parents? And the experience from our center and from my work with women is that very often abusers manipulate the system. And they are trying to, in cases when they have contact with child, which is a right of a child, they use that contact to abuse the child even further. Because very often domestic abuse in Croatia is something that has been going on for years, and abuser very often is returned back to the family and is continuing to do his or her abuse. And when we are talking about power and control, we very often see something that is not quite in accordance with some things I've heard, is that the child's going to the parent that has more power and control, because I cannot imagine that the power and control as abuse of abuser is bigger, is lesser than the power and control of a victim. Thus, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I think you raise a very, very important point, and which is why it's important for practitioners who work in this field to start, if you recall, the inverted triangle. We start with a very broad approach to this, because we have to do the forensic work to understand what's really going on, because we have to understand the life of the child, and each child's life is unique. I think the critical thing here is that we need to have the kinds of frameworks, the kinds of protocols in place that allows the system, the judge if you like, to be able to understand exactly what's going on. You're absolutely right when you say that there are parents who will make allegations that they're being alienated when they're not, when they're abusive, in the same way that we hear false allegations of harm, domestic abuse or whatever, when those things aren't present either. What's happening is that parents will use whatever they think is a tool that will help them to gain power in any particular way. I think one of the things that we need to also focus on, though, is that parental alienation itself is a form of coercive control, and therefore a form of domestic abuse. It's a form of domestic abuse over the child, but very often it's an extension of an existing, of a pre-existing dynamic of abuse and control that was going on before the separation happened. Now, if we look at alienation simply as a contact issue, then we're going to get it wrong. If we're looking at it in terms of the authentic experience of the child mental health, child protection and an emotional abuse framework, we can look at it in a very different way. And what we need to be thinking about is, okay, what are the elements of power and control here? Let's not use a socio-political assumption of what power and control is, which is that men always have power over women, but look at the contextual thing, which is that power and control is exercised by men and women over each other in different forms, in different ways, but ultimately it comes down to the same thing, gaining control over the family system. And that's why we need the frameworks and protocols in place that help us to distinguish what's going on accurately.
I'll just add to that by saying that if we look at this issue in the context of a gender ideological approach, meaning if we only use models like the Duluth model of power and control, then we will get replicable outcomes which always look the same. In alienation, one of the most invisible groups of alienated parents are alienated mothers, they're rejected mothers. And what makes me very, very frustrated at times are the ways in which those who will approach this from, say, a women's rights perspective completely overlook the plight of alienated mothers. In fact, I've worked with some women's rights groups who have actually said, well, you know, they don't want a relationship with their mother because she's not a good enough mother. There must be something wrong if the child is rejecting her. And that's deeply problematic. And it arises because it's only looked at through a particular lens. If you look at parental alienation through a wider lens, through a lens of who has control over who, and who is trying to control the child, then you can see that alienated mothers are actually being driven out of their children's lives through a pattern of coercive control that we're very, very familiar with. The idea of a man controlling a woman because a man has inherent power, he's born with more power than a woman, is very easily recognisable. So I get frustrated when I see alienated mothers silenced and unrepresented, because all of the focus around parental alienation is always on it being used as a false allegation to give control to an abusive father. So I find it problematic to deal with this issue from that one area. Although it is often used as a false allegation, parental alienation being used as a false allegation is also used as a false allegation. So there's a double bind in that, and I find that really problematic. What we have to do with parental alienation is look at this as a mental health issue. We have to use the child to understand what's really going on. If the child is splitting, then there are signs of alienation. If the child is not splitting, then it's something else. And that's regardless of what each parent is saying. This is a mental health issue. It's not about parental rights. And I find it difficult sometimes when we are drawn into the question of whether or not it's used as a tool in a sort of gender ideological landscape, because I think it diverts us from the real problem, which is that we're dealing with children's mental health here.
May I add something there?
Please.
Yeah, there is a trend in Europe and also sometimes in Croatia that it's like we are on the opposite sides. The organizations who protect abused women and researchers and practitioners who work in the field of parental alienation. And then sometimes those organizations said we don't believe in parental alienation, that's impossible, and they just dismiss that. And I think that's very wrong. Because if we want to stop people, in this case fathers, to misuse the parental alienation concept, then we should know more and more about that. And we have to have a clear concept, clear structure, how to recognize it, what to do. And if you are not alienating the child, then it's better for you and for your child to know a lot more about parental alienation. Only in that way you can stop it from being misused. Right?
Evo samo da nešto dodam u ovom dijelu. Kao kazneni sudac često imam slučajeve kada osudim jednog od roditelja da je počinio kazneno djelo na štetu djeteta i često nakon toga moji kolege, obiteljski suci, ne prate te moje odluke i dozvoljavaju kontakte. Ja se kao kazneni sudac moram pitati kako imamo ideju kasnije djetetu koje jest utvrđeno kao žrtva kaznenog djela, da imamo mogućnosti dalje da silimo, gdje je čak u tom kaznenom djelu najčešće i onaj drugi roditelj bio žrtva kaznenog djela, pa onda silimo i onog roditelja i dijete da imaju kontakte sa onim roditeljem koji je osuđen. Nažalost, nemamo praksu i običaj da automatski lišimo roditeljskog prava tog roditelja koji je počinio kazneno djelo, dakle pravomoćno osuđenog roditelja, što ja mislim da u pravnom sustavu nedopustivo. Trebalo bi slijediti odmah nakon takve kaznene odluke oduzimanje roditeljskog prava. Često mi centri za socijalnu skrb kažu, jel je potrebno, ona ima 17 godina, bit će 18, pa nije više važno jel on ima roditeljsko pravo ili ne. A ja im kažem, a što kad će ona biti 70, a on će biti 90, a on neće imati sredstava da živi, a ona će biti dužna da ga uzdržava. Dakle, neke stvari trebamo učiti u našem sustavu, trebamo učiti kako, ako je kazneni sud nešto pravomoćnom odlukom rekao, građanski sud to treba dalje, ja bih rekla, u svojim odlukama, ali i sa prijedlozima Centra za socijalnu skrb da slijede. A moji centri su svi upoznati sa pravomoćnim odlukama kaznenog suda.
A šta ako se dokaže da je lažno optuživanje, kao što je recimo kod nas 26 slučajeva lažnog optuživanja za pedofiliju, dokazano da je lažno?
Da nemate pravomoćnu odluku da je kriv.
Ali ne viđaju roditelja.
Još jedno pitanje i zaključujem.
Just as we are waiting for the microphone, just a comment. I wasn't asking from the ideological perspective then, and I was asking from my experience.
Dobar dan, naša Pečarića. Ja sam slušajući sve vas malo zakasnila u postavljanju pitanja. Naime, htjela sam se uključiti u dijelu kada se razgovaralo o tome da li treba uvažiti mišljenje djeteta, odnosno tko je taj koji to mišljenje djeteta može prenijeti sudu. Smatram da osobe koje su temeljem zakona ovlaštene da razgovaraju sa djetetom u sudskim postupcima nemaju dovoljno stručnih znanja da mogu utvrditi otuđenje. Pa onda i takvi nekakvi iskazi o želji djeteta ne mogu biti dovoljno relevantni da bi su na temelju njih donio odluku. Isto tako smatram da ni suci nemaju dovoljno stručnog znanja da razgovaraju sa djetetom u tom segmentu otuđenja, niti da na temelju takvog iskaza djeteta mogu donijeti bilo kakvu odluku. Iz svih predavanja koje nam je omogućila Poliklinika za zaštitu djece, kao i vi sada danas, na čemu se zahvaljujem, čini mi se da je utvrđivanje otuđenja prilično kompleksan problem. i da odluke koje bi se mogle donijeti bez da se stvarno utvrdi da li je do otuđenja došlo ili da postoje naznake da bi do njega mogli doći, mogu izazvati veliku štetu. Naravno, odluke trebaju biti brze, trebaju biti lišene osobnih stavova onih koji ih donose, trebaju biti primjenjive, ali svejedno smatram da u sustav treba uključiti ljude koji će stajati iza svojih odluka, odnosno koji će dobro proučiti o čemu se radi i jasno i nedvojbeno iskazati to kao stav u sudskom postupku. I nakon toga će biti sve lakše. Za sada mi se čini da nema volje da se ta odgovornost otkloni.
Hvala. I think the comment that's been made is an important one, and I think it underlines what we were talking about before, which is what we call the interlock between the mental health and judicial processes. That it's the combination of those two things that allows us to get to the truth and allows us to determine what's in the best interest of the child and ultimately to make the right decision.
So, talking about training, talking about spreading the information, the knowledge, and standardising practice and intervention. One of the initiatives that we started with our colleagues at the clinic is the European Association of Parental Alienation Practitioners. We meet in Switzerland next month to produce standardised practice and to begin the process of developing training so that we have a workforce in the mental health and legal spheres which is trained to a recognisable standard, which is using interventions which are known to work and which is replicable across borders. So the aim of the European Association is to provide for each country in Europe a standardised intervention, a standardised knowledge base, and a training that can be delivered out to mental health practitioners and to the judiciary, which can be immediately implemented to create significant change for children. So that's quite an ambitious project, but there are a number of partners working together to bring that back, because it's absolutely the case that we have to, as people who work in this space, we have to be able to work in ways that are accountable. We have to work in ways that actually work, not just say that they work. We have to work in ways that produce replicable change for families. And we have to be able to stand by what we say in a highly litigious field. Practice in this space is probably the most difficult. It's as traumatic for the practitioners as it is for the families who are suffering it. And so standardising it and bringing together training programmes and working together with partners is the way that we will address this problem. So I think that question is absolutely important. We've got a fantastic judge here today. We've got a fantastic team at the clinic. We will work in partnership and continue to develop the European Association, and when I say that I think change will come in the next 2 or 3 years, I really mean it, because we will make it happen.
I think that's a nice way to close. So now I would just say some technical information. Ako se niste prijavili, treba vam za komore, to možete sad, ako na kraju se prijavili, bit će još jedno pola sata tamo, možete samo uzeti certifikate, dakle nama ne treba popisna lista, jedino ako vama treba se gotovo. Nisam nikako, trebam ponoviti. Ako vam ne treba bodovi za komore, ne morate se potpisivati na popisne liste, možete samo uzeti certifikat, dakle nama ne trebaju se vaši potpisi. Ako želite bodove, onda se potpišite, još pola sata nakon što završimo će biti otvoren stol za one koji nisu stigli, pa molim naše pripravnike da se puta lagano tamo. Mi ćemo sad otvoriti. Nisam sigurna, so she wants to know if they can get the presentation, maybe PowerPoint on our website.
We will be happy to share the slides if we do that through.
Yeah, we will put it on our website then.
Okay,
Thank you. That's very good.